After my divorce at 72, I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but 2 plastic bags of clothes. My ex-wife stood on the porch and laughed, telling me that at my age, nobody needs me anymore. My daughter-in-law smirked, sipping wine, thinking she had just stolen my life savings. They thought they had destroyed a tired old man, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Before I tell you how I made them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. I am Desmond, though most people just call me Des. I am a 72-year-old man who spent his entire life working with his hands. For decades, I was an audio engineer and a contractor, taking on every grueling job the city of Chicago had to throw at me. I built a life from the ground up. But on that freezing Tuesday morning, the heavy thud of my 2 trash bags hitting the floor of my rusted 1998 RV echoed like a judge striking a gavel. That was it. 40 years of marriage, 30 years of paying off a beautiful brick home in the south suburbs, all reduced to whatever I could carry in my 2 hands. The divorce decree had been finalized just hours earlier. My ex-wife Beatrice got the house, she got the joint savings accounts, she got the cars, she got everything that was visible on paper, and she managed to take it all because of Chloe. Chloe is my daughter-in-law. She is a white woman who married my son Malik 5 years ago. From the moment she stepped into our family, I knew she was the kind of person who saw human beings as stepping stones. Chloe was ruthlessly ambitious, constantly obsessed with appearances, and possessed a talent for financial manipulation that bordered on criminal. When Beatrice filed for divorce, Chloe saw an opportunity. She hired a slick, aggressive corporate lawyer for Beatrice, completely taking over the legal strategy. They painted Beatrice as a long-suffering victim who had sacrificed her life for a stubborn, useless old man. I did not fight them in court. I sat in that courtroom in my faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots, and I let the judge hand Beatrice everything she asked for. I let them think I was completely defeated. I had a very specific reason for not fighting back a secret I had kept buried for decades, but at that moment, standing in my driveway, the sting of betrayal was almost too much to bear. I closed the storage compartment of the RV and turned around. Beatrice was standing on the porch of the house I had paid for. She had her arms crossed over her chest, wearing a smug, victorious expression. "At your age, nobody needs you anymore, Desmond," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You are just a burden. Have fun living in that piece of junk." I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 4 decades. Money and greed had completely rotted her soul. Standing right beside her was Chloe. She was holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine that I had bought with my hard-earned money. Chloe took a slow sip and smirked at me, her eyes flashing with pure arrogance. She had orchestrated my downfall, and she wanted to make sure I knew it. But the sight that truly broke my heart was Malik, my son, my own flesh and blood. The boy I had raised to be a strong man was standing a few steps behind them, staring down at his expensive designer shoes. He could not even look his father in the eyes. Malik had become a coward, a weak man who was absolutely terrified of upsetting his manipulative wife. He watched them throw me onto the street like stray dog, and he did absolutely nothing. I did not scream. I did not curse at them. I simply gave Malik one long, hard look, turned my back, and climbed into the driver's seat of my RV. The engine sputtered and coughed before finally roaring to life. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my past behind in the rearview mirror. The Chicago wind was howling that night, seeping through the cracked weather stripping of the old vehicle. The heater barely worked, and the cold chilled my bones. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process the sheer cruelty of what had just happened. My plan was simple. I just needed to drive out to the edge of the city, find a quiet place to park for the night, and then make a few phone calls in the morning to access my hidden emergency funds. But as I glanced at the dashboard, a bright orange light illuminated the dark cabin. The fuel gauge was resting firmly below, empty. The RV was running on fumes, and I was about to be stranded. I spotted a desolate gas station glowing weakly in the darkness just off the interstate. It was nearly 11 at night. I pulled up to the pump, the brakes squealing in protest. I stepped out into the freezing wind, wrapping my thin jacket tighter around my chest. I pulled out my wallet and took out my primary credit card. It was a standard low-limit card I used for daily expenses, completely separate from anything tied to the divorce. I slid the card into the machine. The screen processed for a moment, then blinked red. Declined. I frowned, my breath pluming in the cold air. I wiped the magnetic strip on my jacket and tried again. Beep. Declined. Contact your financial institution. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. I pulled out my debit card. This account had exactly $412 in it. It was my last bit of visible cash. I walked inside the brightly lit convenience store. The cashier, a young kid looking bored out of his mind, scanned me up and down. "Can you put 50 on pump 4? I asked, handing him the debit card. He swiped it. The register beeped a harsh negative tone. "Sorry, man, it says account frozen." I stared at the machine. Frozen. That was impossible. The judge had not touched this specific personal account. I stepped to the side and pulled out my phone, opening my banking app with numb fingers. When the screen loaded, a glaring red notification popped up. "Your account has been temporarily locked due to a report of a lost or stolen card. Please contact fraud prevention." My blood turned to ice. It was Chloe. Months ago, when I was hospitalized for a severe bout of kidney stones, Malik had convinced me to give him joint access to this emergency checking account so he could pay my medical bills while I was incapacitated. I had trusted my son, but Chloe had his passwords. Chloe controlled everything Malik did. She had anticipated that I would try to use that money to survive the night. As soon as I drove away from the house, she must have logged in and reported the card stolen, completely freezing my assets. She wanted to ensure I had absolutely nothing. She wanted me to freeze in a broken-down RV on the side of the road. She wanted me to suffer. I walked out of the gas station, the biting wind cutting right through my clothes. I sat behind the steering wheel of the RV, staring out into the dark, empty street. I was 72 years old. I was officially homeless. My gas tank was empty, and thanks to my daughter-in-law, I did not have a single dime to my name. I was completely destitute, stranded on the edge of the city at 11 p.m. They had executed their plan perfectly. They had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my resources. They thought they had buried a helpless, senile old man. But sitting there in the freezing dark, I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, calculating rage. Chloe and Beatrice thought I was just a retired tradesman. They had absolutely no idea about the empire I had built in the shadows. They thought they had backed me into a corner. But all they had really done was untie the hands of a man who was about to teach them the most devastating lesson of their lives. The Chicago cold does not just chill your skin, it sinks straight into your bones. By 2 in the morning, the temperature inside my rusted RV had plummeted to near freezing. I was parked in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, watching my breath turn into white clouds in the dark cabin. I could not turn on the engine to run the heater. The fuel needle was already touching the red empty line, and thanks to my daughter-in-law, Chloe, I had zero access to my money to buy more gas. I closed my eyes, trying to force my exhausted body to sleep. Then the harsh glare of red and blue lights flooded the cabin. A heavy fist pounded on the driver's side window. I sat up, my joints aching from the cold, and rolled down the glass. A police officer stood there, shining a blinding flashlight directly into my eyes. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," the officer commanded. I kept my hands visible on the steering wheel. "Officer, I am just resting for the night. The store is closed, and I am parked at the very back of the lot." The officer did not lower the flashlight. "We received a call from a concerned citizen. A woman reported a vagrant trespassing in a suspicious vehicle matching these exact plates. She said you were casing the neighborhood and making the residents feel unsafe. You need to move this vehicle immediately, or I will be forced to impound it." A concerned citizen. Chloe. She had not just frozen my bank accounts. She had actually called the police on a 72-year-old man to ensure I would be driven out into the freezing night. She wanted me exhausted, terrified, and broken. I did not argue. Arguing with the police in the middle of the night never ends well for a man who looks like me. I simply nodded, rolled up the window, and turned the ignition. The engine coughed twice before turning over. I put it in drive and slowly rolled out of the parking lot, watching the police cruiser follow me in the rearview mirror until I crossed the city limits. I drove until the engine began to sputter. I managed to pull into a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of the city, parking beside a chain-link fence. It was 4 in the morning. The silence was heavy, broken only by the howling wind shaking the sides of the RV. I pulled the wool blanket back over my shoulders, staring at the frost forming on the inside of the windshield. Beatrice and Chloe thought they had won. They thought they had discarded a useless old electronics repairman. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen displayed an incoming call from a New York area code. I swiped to answer and pressed the phone to my ear. "Good morning, Mr. Rollins." The voice was crisp, professional, and wide awake. It was Julian. Julian was a senior corporate attorney at one of the most ruthless law firms in Manhattan. He was a shark in a tailored suit, and he answered to only one person. Me. "Speak to me, Julian," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. The 20-year non-disclosure agreement expired at midnight. Julian stated, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing in the background. "The West Loop Commercial District merger has been officially activated. The holding company has liquidated the final assets as instructed. I need your secure signature to authorize the release of the funds. $45 million is sitting in the escrow account ready for your deployment." I let out a slow, steady breath. $45 million. My ex-wife Beatrice and my deceitful daughter-in-law Chloe honestly believed I was just a retired blue-collar worker who fixed broken radios and televisions. They thought my entire net worth was tied up in that suburban brick house and a meager retirement savings account. They had no idea what I was doing in the 1980s, back then when businesses were fleeing the city and properties in the West Loop were rotting away. I took every spare dollar I earned from my repair shop and bought up abandoned warehouses. I bought them for absolute pennies on the dollar, but I never put my name on the deeds. I created a blind shell corporation called Rollins Holdings. I structured it so deep behind layers of legal protection that nobody, not even my own wife, could ever trace it back to Desmond Rollins. I did it because I knew Beatrice. I knew her greed. I knew that if she ever found out about the real money, she would stop being a wife and start acting like a parasite. I wanted my family to live comfortably, but I wanted my son Malik to learn the value of hard work. I built an empire in the shadows, waiting for the right time to secure my legacy. Well, the time had arrived, but the circumstances had changed. "Julian, listen to me carefully," I said, staring out at the frozen industrial wasteland. "Do not transfer a single dime to any of my visible accounts. Keep the entire $45 million completely frozen in the corporate trust." There was a slight pause on the other end. Julian was a man who processed information quickly. "Is there a problem, Mr. Rollins? Do we need to activate the legal defense team?" "No," I replied, a cold smile forming on my face. "There is no problem. I just have a very specific net to cast. My ex-wife and my daughter-in-law have decided to declare war on me. They stripped my personal accounts and threw me on the street. They think they have absolute control. I want them to continue feeling powerful. I want them to get greedy." "Understood," Julian said, his tone turning dangerously sharp. "We will keep Rollins Holdings entirely invisible. Say the word, and I will dismantle them financially." "Just prepare the commercial lease agreements we discussed last month," I told him, "and get on a plane to Chicago. Things are about to get very interesting." I ended the call. The cold inside the RV suddenly did not bother me anymore. I was a homeless man sitting in a broken-down vehicle, but I possessed enough financial firepower to crush Chloe and Beatrice into dust. All I had to do was wait for them to make their next mistake. But my moment of triumph was violently interrupted. A blinding yellow strobe light flashed through the rear window of the RV. The heavy mechanical grinding of a diesel engine roared right behind me. I looked in the side mirror and my jaw clenched. A massive city tow truck had just backed up to my rear bumper. The hydraulic lift was already lowering, sliding its steel forks under my rear tires. Chloe had not just called the police. She had reported the RV as an abandoned derelict vehicle. I was a multimillionaire on paper, but right now the city was about to tow away my home, and I did not have a single dollar in my pocket to stop them. The heavy steel forks of the tow truck lifted the rear tires of my RV off the frozen asphalt with a loud metallic groan. I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, holding nothing but my phone and my worn leather wallet. I did not yell. I did not plead with the driver. When a city contractor has an official impound order for a derelict vehicle, arguing is just a waste of breath. I stood on the cracked pavement of that desolate industrial park and watched my only shelter being hauled away into the darkness. Chloe had planned this perfectly. First, she froze my bank account so I could not buy gas. Then she called in a municipal violation to have the vehicle impounded. She was trying to strip away my basic human survival needs piece by piece until I crawled back to her and Beatrice on my hands and knees. I pulled my thin jacket tight against the freezing wind and started walking. My bones ached with every step, but my mind was sharper than it had been in decades. About a mile down the road, the neon sign of a 24-hour diner buzzed weakly in the pre-dawn gloom. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The place smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee. I sat in a sticky vinyl booth at the very back, away from the windows. I ordered a cup of black coffee from a waitress who looked just as tired as I felt. I paid with the last 3 crumpled dollar bills I had in my pocket. It was 5 a.m. Julian, my corporate attorney, had texted me his flight itinerary. He was on the first plane out of JFK and would land at O'Hare in a few hours. All I had to do was sit in this grimy booth, drink my bitter coffee, and wait. But peace is a luxury you do not get when dealing with greedy people. The bell above the diner door jingled. I did not look up right away, but the sharp, rapid clicking of expensive high heels against the linoleum floor made my stomach tighten. Well, look at this. The proud Desmond Rollins drinking penny coffee in a dump. I slowly raised my eyes. Chloe was standing by my booth wearing a tailored cashmere coat that cost more than most people make in a month. Right behind her, shuffling his feet and avoiding my gaze, was my son Malik. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice calm and completely empty of emotion. Malik cleared his throat, looking at the dirty floor. "The family phone plan." "Dad, we still have location sharing turned on. You never disabled it." I looked at my son. He was a grown man standing well over 6 feet tall, yet he looked incredibly small. He was a shadow of the boy I had raised, completely eclipsed by the toxic woman standing next to him. They had tracked me like a fugitive. They knew my RV had been towed. They knew my accounts were locked. They came here knowing I was stranded, exhausted, and supposedly penniless. But they did not come to offer me a ride. They did not come to buy me a warm meal. Chloe slid into the booth opposite me uninvited. She motioned for Malik to sit next to her. He slid in, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the table. Chloe reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She slapped them down on the table right next to my coffee cup. "We are not here to gloat, Des," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake professionalism. "We are here to offer you a lifeline. You are homeless. You have no money. Beatrice took everything in the divorce. But I am willing to help you out of this pathetic situation if you do exactly what I say." I looked at the documents. The bold letters at the top of the page read, "Small Business Administration Veteran-Owned Business Loan Application." "What is this?" I asked, leaning back against the vinyl seat. "It is a $200,000 SBA loan," Chloe said smoothly, leaning forward. "I am starting a digital media company. The market is lucrative, but traditional bank interest rates are too high right now. However, the federal government offers incredibly low rates and priority approval for businesses owned by military veterans." She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against the signature line. "You served in Vietnam. You have an honorable discharge. I need you to co-sign this loan as the primary business owner. You just put your name on the paper, let me use your veteran status, and in exchange I will unlock your checking account. I might even give you a few $100 a month so you can rent a cheap room somewhere instead of sleeping on the street. It is a win-win." I stared at her. The sheer audacity of this woman was almost suffocating. I was drafted into the military when I was 19 years old. I watched good men, my friends, die in the mud. I earned my honorable discharge through blood and sacrifice, and this arrogant, entitled woman wanted to use my military record to commit financial fraud and fund her fake media startup. She wanted me to take on $250,000 in federal debt while she controlled the money. I shifted my gaze to my son. "Malik," I said, my voice low and heavy. "Are you listening to your wife? She is asking me to commit federal loan fraud. If this business fails, the government will come after me. They will garnish my Social Security. They will ruin the last years of my life. Do you agree with this?" Malik swallowed hard. His hands were trembling on his lap. "Dad, it is just paperwork. Chloe has a great business plan. You owe us, man. You made Mom miserable for years. Just sign the paper. It is the least you can do." My heart turned to absolute stone. The final thread of paternal hope I had for him snapped. He was not just weak, he was fully complicit. He was willing to throw his own father under a bus just to keep his wife happy. I looked back at Chloe. I reached out, picked up the thick stack of loan documents, and calmly tore them perfectly in half. Chloe gasped, her eyes going wide. "No," I said, dropping the torn pieces onto the sticky table. I will not sign your fraudulent papers. I will not let you use my name. And I will never, as long as I draw breath, give you a single dime of my credit. Chloe stared at the destroyed documents, her face turning a deep, angry shade of red. The fake corporate smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure malice. She leaned across the table, getting right in my face. "You stupid, arrogant old man," she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You think you have a choice? You think you can just say no to me?" She reached into her bag again. Her hands were shaking with rage. She pulled out a single, neatly folded piece of paper and threw it at my chest. "Read it," she snapped. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a court-stamped document. A petition for emergency conservatorship. I looked up at her, keeping my expression perfectly blank. "You are living like a vagrant." Chloe sneered, her voice rising in volume. "You are wandering the streets in the middle of the night. You are confused. You are hostile. You have no permanent address and no access to funds. I have already submitted this petition to the county judge. We are claiming that you are suffering from severe cognitive decline and pose a danger to yourself." She pointed a finger at me. "The judge is going to grant Malik full legal conservatorship over you. That means Malik will control your finances, Malik will control your medical decisions, and Malik will control where you live. You refuse to sign a simple business loan. Fine. When the judge signs this order next week, we will not need your permission to use your identity." Chloe stood up, buttoning her expensive coat. She looked down at me as if I were an insect she was about to crush under her heel. "You had your chance to do this the easy way," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Now we are going to strip away your legal rights. We are going to lock you away in a state-run psychiatric ward where nobody will ever listen to a word you say. You will rot in a hospital bed wearing a paper gown, and we will take everything." She turned on her heel and marched toward the diner exit. Malik stood up slowly. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a pathetic mixture of guilt and fear. "I am sorry, Dad," he mumbled. "You brought this on yourself." He turned and hurried after his wife, leaving me alone in the booth. I watched through the dirty glass window as they climbed into their luxury SUV and drove away into the morning light. They thought they had just delivered a fatal blow. They thought the threat of a conservatorship would break my spirit and terrify me into submission. They honestly believed they were dealing with a helpless, senile old man who had no resources to fight back against the legal system. I picked up my cold cup of coffee and took a slow sip. A genuine smile crept onto my face. They wanted to play corporate warfare. They wanted to use contracts and legal petitions to destroy my life. They had absolutely no idea that they had just threatened a man who controlled a real estate empire worth $45 million. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Julian. Landed. "I have the holding company documents. Where do you want to meet?" I typed back my reply. "Get a private car. Meet me at the diner. It is time to execute the liability clause." Chloe wanted a war. I was about to give her a massacre. The man in the cheap gray suit did not even ask for my name. He just walked up to the park bench where I was eating a cold sandwich, dropped a thick yellow envelope onto my lap, and said, "You have been served." I did not flinch. I waited until he drove away before I opened the envelope. It was a court summons for a conservatorship hearing. Attached to it was a sworn affidavit from my ex-wife, Beatrice. I read her statement and a bitter laugh escaped my throat. Beatrice had sworn under penalty of perjury that I was suffering from severe cognitive decline. She claimed I was a danger to myself and others. Her primary piece of evidence was an incident from last winter where she alleged I had completely lost my mind and set the living room curtains on fire. The absolute nerve of that woman. I remembered that night perfectly. Beatrice had come home highly intoxicated after a dinner with her country club friends. She passed out on the living room sofa with a lit cigarette in her hand. The ash caught the edge of the polyester drapes. I was the one who woke up to the smell of smoke. I was the one who grabbed the fire extinguisher and put it out before the whole house burned down. Now she was twisting my heroic act into a weapon to lock me in a psychiatric ward. 10 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The rear door swung open. Julian, my corporate attorney, was sitting in the back typing rapidly on a tablet. I climbed inside. "They filed the petition this morning," Julian said without looking up. They are moving aggressively, Mr. Rollins. The judge has ordered a mandatory psychiatric evaluation to determine your mental competency. If you fail this evaluation, Malik gets temporary emergency control over your person. That means they can force you into a state facility by Friday. I tossed the court summons onto the leather seat. Beatrice perjured herself. She lied about the fire. I can prove it. I can bring in the fire department incident report. I can show the judge my bank statements to prove I am perfectly capable of managing my life. Let us crush them right now, Julian. No, Julian said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold and sharp. If you reveal your hand now, you only win a minor skirmish. They will realize you have resources and they will scatter like roaches. We need them to commit fully. We need them to dig a hole so deep they can never climb out. I want you to play the prey, Mr. Rollins. Play the prey, I repeated, narrowing my eyes. Yes. Go to this court-appointed doctor. Let them think their plan is working. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, but do not fail the test. The next morning, I walked into the polished, high-end medical clinic of Dr. Eris Thorne. Chloe had specifically requested this doctor in her legal petition, claiming he was a leading specialist in geriatric psychiatry. The waiting room smelled of expensive lavender and sanitized lies. A nurse called my name and I shuffled into the examination room, keeping my shoulders slumped and my gaze low. I was playing the part of the tired, broken old man they expected to see. Dr. Thorne walked in. He was a man in his 50s with perfectly slicked back hair, an expensive silk tie, and a patronizing smile. He did not look at me like a patient. He looked at me like a nuisance he was being paid to dispose of. "Hello, Desmond," Dr. Thorne said, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. "I'm going to ask you a few simple questions. There is no need to be nervous. We just want to make sure you are safe." I slowly lifted my head. Before I answered, my eyes scanned his office. I noticed a framed photograph resting on the corner of his bookshelf. It was a picture of Dr. Thorne standing on a lush green golf course, smiling widely, with his arm wrapped around another man. I recognized the other man instantly. It was William, Chloe's father. The connection was crystal clear. This was not an impartial medical evaluation. This was a setup. Chloe had used her father's wealthy country club connections to secure a doctor who was willing to sign my life away as a favor to a friend. "Let us begin. Desmond," Dr. Thorne said, picking up a pen. "Can you tell me what day it is?" "It is Thursday, November 12th, I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Very good. Now, Desmond, I understand you have been experiencing some confusion lately. Your family is very worried. Your daughter-in-law, Chloe, mentioned that you wander the streets at night. Is that true?" "I do not wander, Dr. Thorne. My vehicle was illegally towed by the city. I was walking to a diner to stay warm. I am fully aware of my surroundings." Dr. Thorne frowned slightly, clearly not expecting such a coherent answer. He leaned forward, trying a different tactic. "Let us try a cognitive exercise. I want you to start at 100 and count backward by sevens, a trick to test concentration and working memory. 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51. I rattled off the numbers without a single second of hesitation, my voice firm and authoritative. Dr. Thorne stopped writing. The patronizing smile slipped from his face. He cleared his throat. "Let us talk about the fire, Desmond. Your ex-wife stated in a sworn legal document that you deliberately set the curtains on fire because you thought there were insects in the fabric. Do you remember having hallucinations?" I sat up straight in my chair. I dropped the act. I looked directly into his eyes, projecting the full weight of a man who managed multi-million-dollar commercial real estate negotiations. "There were no hallucinations, Dr. Thorne." Beatrice fell asleep while smoking a Virginia Slim after consuming the better part of a bottle of Chardonnay. If you request the Chicago Fire Department incident report from last February, you will see the official cause of the fire was listed as careless smoking by an intoxicated individual. The dispatch time was 11:42 p.m. My signature is on the incident report as the reporting party. Dr. Thorne swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He realized he was not dealing with a senile old man. He was dealing with a mind sharper than his own. "You seem very alert today, Desmond," he said, trying to regain control of the room. "But dementia can fluctuate." "Dr. Thorne," I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice, "I see the picture on your shelf. You have a terrible swing, by the way. Your left shoulder dips too much. but I am sure your golf buddy William does not mind." The color drained completely from the doctor's face. He looked at the picture, then back at me, absolute panic flashing in his eyes. "I know exactly why I am here," I continued, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a razor. "I know Chloe sent you. I know you were planning to sign a document declaring me legally incompetent as a favor to her father. But you are a medical professional with a license to protect. If you submit a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation to a federal judge and I demand a secondary evaluation from an independent medical board, you will not just lose your license, you will go to federal prison for medical fraud." Dr. Thorne sat frozen in his leather chair. He was trapped and he knew it. He slowly put his pen down. "I will inform the court that you display no signs of cognitive impairment," he whispered, looking down at his desk. "You are perfectly competent to manage your own affairs." I stood up, adjusted the collar of my worn-out flannel shirt, and walked to the door. "Have a good day, doctor. Tell William I said hello." I walked out of the clinic, feeling a surge of absolute victory. I had beaten them at their own game. I navigated the long corridor and pushed through the double doors into the main lobby. Chloe and Malik were sitting in the waiting area. They were expecting Dr. Thorne to walk out and hand them the paperwork that would effectively end my life. When they saw me walking out alone, looking tall and completely composed, Chloe immediately stood up, her face twisting in confusion. Dr. Thorne hurried out right behind me. He did not look at me. He looked at Chloe, his face pale and nervous. "I cannot do it, Chloe," Dr. Thorne said quietly. "He is lucid. His memory is perfect. I will not risk my medical license for this. The evaluation is clear. He is fully competent." Chloe's jaw dropped. She looked like she had just been slapped. She turned her furious glare toward me, her hands balling into tight fists. She stepped right into my personal space, her eyes burning with pure hatred. "You think you are so smart, Des," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you won today because you talked your way out of one doctor visit. You think you can outsmart me." I looked down at her. "I am not trying to outsmart you, Chloe. I am just watching you destroy yourself." A cruel, twisted smirk slowly spread across Chloe's face. She tilted her head, her eyes flashing with a sickening kind of triumph. "Am I destroying myself?" she mocked softly. "Or are you just too distracted to protect what is really important to you?" My stomach dropped. "Check your storage unit, Des," she whispered, her voice laced with pure venom. "It is amazing what people leave behind when they are too busy taking tests." I did not wait another second. I pushed past her and sprinted out of the building. When Beatrice kicked me out, I had moved a few of my most precious personal belongings into a cheap $20 a month storage locker on the south side. It was just boxes of old clothes, some rusty tools, and one small, heavily secured metal lockbox. I flagged down a taxi and rushed to the storage facility. I ran down the concrete hallway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached Unit 402. The heavy steel padlock had been completely severed with bolt cutters. It was lying broken on the concrete floor. I threw the metal door open. The boxes of clothes were torn apart. My tools were scattered everywhere, but I did not care about any of that. I fell to my knees and desperately dug through the pile of belongings, searching for the heavy metal lockbox. I found it buried under a torn blanket. The hinges were pried open. It was empty. Inside that box was a vintage gold locket. It was the only thing I had left of my mother. She gave it to me on her deathbed 40 years ago. It had no real financial value, but to me it was worth more than the entire $45 million sitting in my corporate trust. Malik. My own son had used the time I was trapped at the psychiatric clinic to break into my storage unit and steal the only piece of my mother I had left. He did it to hurt me. He did it to break my spirit. I knelt on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit, staring at the empty metal box. The anger I felt was no longer cold and calculated. It was a blazing, uncontrollable inferno. They had crossed the ultimate line. It was no longer just about the money. It was no longer just about the house. This was personal, and I was going to tear their entire world down to the foundation. The rhythmic thumping of the city bus tires over the cracked Chicago asphalt felt exactly like the beating of my own furious heart. I sat in the very back row, watching the gray city blocks blur past the dirty window. The anger inside me was no longer a hot, sudden flash. It had settled into a deep, freezing cold. They had taken my house. They had taken my visible bank accounts. They had even tried to take my sanity. I could have lived with all of that because I knew I had the power to take it all back. But the locket was different. That vintage gold locket was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of my history. My mother brought that locket with her when she fled the Jim Crow South and came to Chicago looking for a better life. She worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. She wore that locket every single day of her life until the afternoon she died in my arms 40 years ago. It was the only tangible piece of her I had left in this world, and my own son had cut the locks off my storage unit and stolen it just to impress his greedy wife. I stepped off the bus and walked the 3 blocks to my old neighborhood. The pristine suburban lawns and quiet streets felt like a cruel joke compared to the absolute chaos raging inside my chest. I walked up the driveway of the beautiful brick house I had paid for with decades of sweat and aching muscles. I marched straight up the porch steps and pounded my heavy fist against the heavy wooden door. I did not ring the doorbell. I pounded until the glass panes rattled in their frames. After a long, agonizing minute, the deadbolt clicked. The door opened just a few inches. Malik stood in the narrow gap. He was wearing an expensive cashmere sweater, but he looked like an absolute wreck. His eyes were bloodshot and dark, heavy bags hung under them. He kept one hand firmly on the doorknob, physically blocking me from stepping inside the house I had built for him. "Dad, you cannot be here," he whispered frantically, glancing nervously over his shoulder into the empty hallway. "Chloe is upstairs resting. If she hears your voice, she is going to call the police and tell them you are violating the property order. Please, just go away." I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. I just stared right through him. "Where is it, Malik?" I asked, my voice rumbling low and dangerous. "Where is what, Dad? I do not know." "What you are talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting to the porch floor, unable to meet my gaze. "Do not play stupid with me, boy," I growled, taking a half step forward, forcing him to grip the door tighter. "The storage unit, the metal lockbox. You took your grandmother's gold locket. I want it back right now, and I will walk away. Hand it over." Malik swallowed hard. A bead of nervous sweat rolled down his temple despite the freezing weather. His chest heaved as he let out a ragged, desperate breath. "I do not have it, Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then go upstairs and get it from your wife," I demanded. "You do not understand, Dad. I really do not have it anymore," Malik said, tears suddenly welling up in his exhausted eyes. Chloe. She had this credit card debt. Massive debt. The collection agencies were calling the house every single day. They were going to garnish her wages. They were going to put a lien on the house. She was screaming at me, telling me I was a failure as a husband because I could not provide for her. I panicked. I remembered you told me once how much that antique locket was appraised for. I went to the pawn shop on 53rd Street yesterday afternoon. I sold it, Dad. I sold it to pay off her platinum card. The silence that fell between us was heavier than a concrete block. I looked at the man standing in front of me. I looked at my own flesh and blood. I had spent my entire life breaking my back in the construction yards of Chicago so that this boy would never have to bow his head to anyone. I raised him to be a strong, proud black man, and now I was staring at a trembling, cowardly shadow of a human being. He was so terrified of losing his manipulative, greedy white wife that he had literally sold his own grandmother's legacy to fund her luxury shopping habits. He was expecting me to explode. He braced himself as if waiting for a physical blow, but I did not raise my hand. I did not curse. The profound, pathetic weakness of the man standing in front of me completely extinguished my rage, leaving nothing but absolute disgust. "Dad, please say something," Malik begged, crying openly now, wiping his face with the sleeve of his expensive sweater. "I will get it back, I swear. I will work overtime. I will buy it back from the pawn shop. Just please do not look at me like that." I looked him dead in the eyes and delivered a verdict colder than the Chicago wind. "Keep the money." I said, my voice completely void of any emotion. "You bought your wife another month of luxury and you paid for it with your soul. But hear me clearly. From today on, you are no longer my son. You are nothing to me." "Dad, no, please," Malik sobbed, reaching a hand out through the crack in the door. I turned my back on him. I walked down the porch steps and down the driveway. I did not look back, even as I heard him drop to his knees behind the heavy oak door, weeping like a broken child. He had made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences. As soon as I reached the sidewalk, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lawyer in New York. Julian answered on the first ring. "Mr. Rollins." Julian said, his tone sharp and ready. "Julian, I want you to unleash the hounds," I ordered, staring down the quiet suburban street. "Dig up absolutely everything on Chloe. I do not care how much it costs or how deep you have to go. I want her financial life torn down to the studs. Find every skeleton in her closet. Find every dirty secret she has ever tried to bury." "Consider it done, Mr. Rollins," Julian replied. "I will have a full dossier within the hour." I walked for 2 miles until I found a small public park. I sat on a freezing wooden bench, staring at the gray sky, gathering my strength. They had crossed the final line. There was no more playing the victim. There was no more holding back to protect my son. Malik was a casualty of war now, and Chloe was the main target. Exactly 2 hours later, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was Julian. "Mr. Rollins, you are going to want to hear this," Julian said, his voice laced with a dark kind of amusement. "Your daughter-in-law is not just a greedy opportunist. She is a full-blown criminal, and she is currently standing on the edge of a massive cliff. Tell me everything I said," leaning forward. "That digital media company she claims to be starting," Julian explained. "It is a complete shell corporation. There is no business plan, and there are no employees. It is a front. We hacked into the public records and traced her financial footprint. She is completely underwater. She owes over $300,000 to an underground lending syndicate operating out of the South Side. Real loan sharks, Mr. Rollins, the kind of people who break legs when they do not get paid." I narrowed my eyes. That explained the desperation. That explained why she was trying to force me to sign federal loan documents and why she drove Malik to pawn my mother's locket. She was terrified. "It gets worse," Julian continued. "We pulled the credit application she filed over the last month. She has been forging Malik's signature on multiple high-interest personal loans. If those default, Malik is going to go to federal prison for bank fraud right alongside her." "Let him," I said coldly. "What else?" "This is the best part," Julian said, a vicious smile clear in his voice. "In a desperate attempt to look legitimate to a group of private investors, she is currently trying to lease a massive luxury commercial office space in the West Loop. She submitted the application yesterday morning. She is trying to use the lease agreement to prove to the investors that her company is real so she can steal their venture capital and pay off the loan sharks." "I see," I murmured. "And why is this the best part, Julian?" "Because, Mr. Rollins," Julian paused for dramatic effect, "the commercial property she applied to lease is the newly renovated glass building on Randolph Street. The building is owned by a corporate entity known as Rollins Holdings." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The corners of my mouth slowly curled upward into a wide, predatory smile. Out of all the thousands of commercial buildings in the city of Chicago, Chloe had unknowingly submitted her fraudulent business application to the very real estate empire that I secretly owned. She was walking right into my house and handing me the keys to her absolute destruction. "Julian," I said, my voice vibrating with dark anticipation, "approve her lease application immediately. Give her whatever terms she wants. Make her think she just won the lottery. But when you draft the final contract, I need you to bury a very specific clause in the fine print. I am listening, Mr. Rollins." "We are going to give her exactly what she wants," I whispered, "and then we are going to bury her alive." After my divorce at 72, I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but 2 plastic bags of clothes. My ex-wife stood on the porch and laughed, telling me that at my age nobody needs me anymore. My daughter-in-law smirked, sipping wine, thinking she had just stolen my life savings. They thought they had destroyed a tired old man, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Before I tell you how I made them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. My phone vibrated in my pocket the next afternoon. The caller ID showed Malik. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Immediately, the sound of heavy, ragged sobbing came through the speaker. It was a performance that would have won an Oscar if I did not already know the director. "Dad, I am so sorry," Malik wept, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "I was weak. I was scared. I never should have sold your mother's locket. Please, Dad. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. I need to make things right. Let me take you to dinner tonight. Just us. We can talk. We can fix this. I beg you. I listened to his pathetic performance with absolute zero emotion. A week ago, those tears would have broken my heart. Today, they just sounded like a cheap commercial. I knew exactly what this was. Chloe had realized that confronting me in a dirty diner had not worked, so she sent her lapdog to try a different angle. I will meet you, I said, my voice flat. Where? He gave me the name of a wildly expensive French restaurant in the Gold Coast district, a place where a glass of water probably cost more than my weekly groceries. I hung up the phone and tapped the voice memo app on my screen, making sure it was ready. I was not going to a family reconciliation. I was walking into an ambush and I was going to capture every single second of it. I arrived at the restaurant at 7. The maitre d' looked at me like I had just crawled out of a dumpster. I was wearing my faded work jeans, my scuffed steel toe boots, and my old flannel shirt. I ignored his disgusted glare and walked straight into the main dining room. I spotted them in a private alcove near the back. It was not just Malik. Sitting right next to him was Chloe, wearing a sleek black designer dress, and across from her sat my ex-wife Beatrice, draped in a ridiculous fur coat that I had paid for a decade ago. They looked like 3 vultures waiting for a carcass. I walked over and pulled out the empty chair. None of them greeted me. The illusion of a tearful apology from my son vanished the second I sat down. Malik kept his eyes glued to the white linen tablecloth. Beatrice sneered at my clothes while Chloe simply took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes locked onto mine like a predator. I thought this was a father and son dinner, I said, leaning back in my chair. Beatrice let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Please, Desmond, stop acting like you have options. We are here to do you a favor before you freeze to death in whatever gutter you are sleeping in tonight. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a manila folder. She slid it across the white tablecloth until it rested right in front of me. I looked down at it, but I did not touch it. I slowly reached into my pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. What is this? I asked. It is your salvation, Chloe said, leaning forward, placing her elbows on the table. It is an admission contract for the Oakwood State Care Facility. I knew Oakwood. Everyone in the South Side knew Oakwood. It was the absolute bottom of the barrel when it came to nursing homes. It was a miserable, underfunded state-run warehouse where they sent people who had no money and no family to advocate for them. It was a place where residents were heavily medicated, strapped to beds, and forgotten until they died. Chloe tapped the document. We have already filled out all the necessary paperwork, Des. All you have to do is sign at the bottom. You agree to voluntarily commit yourself to Oakwood for the remainder of your natural life. You sign over your Social Security checks to the facility to cover your basic room and board. In exchange, Malik and I will formally withdraw our petition for emergency conservatorship. We will drop the psychiatric evaluations. We will leave you alone. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. You want me to lock myself in a state-run asylum? It is exactly what you deserve, Beatrice spat, her eyes flashing with pure malice. You are old. You are useless. You have nothing. You should be grateful we are not just letting you rot on the street. Sign the paper, Desmond. Give Malik full power of attorney to handle whatever pathetic scraps you have left and go quietly. I looked at Malik. Are you going to say anything, son? Is this your grand apology? Malik swallowed hard, still refusing to look at me. It is for the best, Dad. You are not well. You need supervision. I shifted my gaze back to Chloe. And what if I refuse to sign? What if I walk out of here right now and fight your conservatorship petition in court? Chloe's fake smile completely disappeared. The mask fell off, revealing the absolute monster underneath. She leaned across the table, getting dangerously close to my face. If you refuse to sign this, Des, I will make sure the rest of your short life is a living hell, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. We will drag you through the court system until you are bleeding from the eyes. I will hire experts to testify that you are a violent schizophrenic. I will have the police arrest you every time you try to sleep on a park bench. I will bleed you completely dry in legal fees until you are starving on the sidewalk. You have no money. You have no home. You have no power. You are nothing. Sign the paper or I will personally destroy you. My phone, hidden deep in my pocket, recorded every single syllable of her extortion. It captured Beatrice's cruel laughter. It captured Malik's pathetic silence. It captured the exact moment they legally crossed the line into criminal blackmail. I looked at the three of them. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. I simply picked up the manila folder and tucked it under my arm. "Let me think about it," I said, my voice completely smooth and unbothered. "I will give you my answer soon." I stood up, turned my back on them, and walked out of the restaurant. I could feel their confused stares burning into my back. They expected me to beg. They expected me to cry. They did not expect me to walk away with a calm smile on my face. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I was sitting in the back of Julian's private town car parked 3 blocks away from the West Loop Commercial District. I handed him my phone. "I want this audio file backed up on multiple secure servers," I told him. "It is textbook extortion, but we are not taking it to the police yet. I want Chloe to feel like she is winning." Julian listened to the recording. A cold, predatory grin spread across his face. "They are incredibly stupid, Mr. Rollins. This is a felony." "I know," I replied, "but putting her in jail right now is too easy. I want her to lose everything first. I want her to feel the exact same terror she tried to force on me." "What is the status of her commercial lease application for the West Loop property?" "She has been calling the leasing office every hour," Julian said, pulling out a thick binder of legal contracts. "She is desperate. She needs this lease to prove to her investors that her shell company is legitimate. The loan sharks are breathing down her neck for their $300,000. "Approve the lease immediately," I ordered. "Tell the property manager to give her whatever terms she wants. Make it look like a golden opportunity. But Julian, I need you to rewrite the standard contract. I want you to bury a personal liability clause deep in the fine print." Julian flipped open the binder and pulled out a gold pen. "How aggressive do you want this clause to be, sir?" "I want it to be the most ruthless legal trap in the history of Chicago real estate," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "I want the clause to state that in the event of any financial fraud, misrepresentation of funds, or default, the holding company has the immediate, uncontested right to seize all personal assets of the guarantor." Julian paused, looking up at me. "Mr. Rollins, Chloe has no personal assets. She is completely underwater. Even if we seize her accounts, we get nothing. I know Chloe has nothing," I said, a dark smile spreading across my face. "That is why she cannot be the guarantor. Tell the leasing office that because her business is a startup, corporate policy requires a co-signer with a high net worth and significant property ownership." Julian's eyes widened as he realized exactly what I was doing. "You want Beatrice to co-sign the lease?" "Exactly," I whispered. "Chloe is terrified of the loan sharks. She will do whatever it takes to secure this building. She will beg Beatrice to co-sign. And Beatrice, being the arrogant fool that she is, will put up the house she just stole from me as collateral, thinking this fake media company is going to make them all millions." Julian began writing furiously in the margins of the contract. "I will draft it so tight that not a single judge in the state could break it. If Chloe uses illegal funds to pay the deposit, it instantly triggers a breach of contract. We can execute the seizure clause within 24 hours. "Make it happen, Julian," I said, looking out the tinted window at the towering skyscrapers of my city. "They wanted to put me in a home and take everything I built. Now I'm going to let them build their own prison, and I am going to lock the door from the outside." After my divorce at 72, I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but 2 plastic bags of clothes. My ex-wife stood on the porch and laughed, telling me that at my age, nobody needs me anymore. My daughter-in-law smirked, sipping wine, thinking she had just stolen my life savings. They thought they had destroyed a tired old man, but they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Before I tell you how I made them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. I sat on a freezing concrete bench in a public park, clutching a paper cup of cheap tea to keep my hands warm. The wind whipping off Lake Michigan was brutal, but I did not feel the cold. My attention was entirely focused on the small, discreet wireless earbud tucked into my right ear. Julian had set up a secure real-time audio feed directly from the executive conference room of Rollins Holdings. I was listening to the sound of my enemies digging their own graves. Through the earpiece, I could hear the sharp, arrogant click of Chloe's expensive heels pacing across the polished hardwood floor of the West Loop office. She was practically vibrating with excitement. "This space is absolutely perfect," Chloe announced, her voice echoing in the large room. "The floor-to-ceiling windows, the open concept layout, it is exactly the kind of aesthetic my media empire needs to project. My investors are going to be incredibly impressed." I smiled grimly. Her investors. She meant the violent underground loan sharks she owed $300,000 to. She was desperately trying to use my luxury commercial space as a shiny facade to convince them she was a legitimate CEO, hoping to buy herself more time before they came looking to break her legs. "I am thrilled you love the space, Mrs. Rollins," the property manager said smoothly. Julian had handpicked him for this exact meeting. He was playing the role of the eager, accommodating corporate landlord perfectly. "We expedited your application because Rollins Holdings is highly committed to supporting innovative local startups. There is just one final piece of paperwork to execute before I hand over the keys." I leaned forward on the park bench, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. This was the moment. "Because your company is newly established and does not have a 5-year corporate tax history?" The property manager explained, his tone apologetic but firm. "Our underwriters require a personal guarantor for the lease, someone with significant unencumbered assets to co-sign the agreement. Just a standard corporate formality, of course." There was a brief pause, then I heard the sound of Beatrice clearing her throat. She had accompanied Chloe to the leasing office, eager to play the role of the wealthy, sophisticated matriarch. "That will not be a problem at all," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "I will be the guarantor for my daughter-in-law. I recently took full, undisputed ownership of a sprawling suburban estate. It is completely paid off. No mortgage, no liens. It is a highly valuable asset." I gripped the paper cup in my hand so tightly that the hot tea spilled over the rim. She was talking about my house. The brick home I had poured 30 years of blood, sweat, and backbreaking labor into. The home she had stolen from me in the divorce. She was parading my life's work around as if she had earned it. "Excellent," the property manager said, the sound of thick papers sliding across a glass table coming through the feed. "If you could just review and sign Section 4, madam. That is the personal liability clause." I closed my eyes and listened intently. Julian had drafted that specific clause with the precision of a master assassin. It was buried under 3 pages of dense, complex legal jargon that a seasoned lawyer would need an hour to decipher. But the core function of the clause was incredibly simple and entirely lethal. It stated that in the event of any financial misrepresentation, including the use of illicit funds, undeclared debt, or fraudulent banking applications to secure the lease, Rollins Holdings reserved the immediate uncontested right to seize all personal assets of the guarantor to cover potential corporate damages. Chloe did not care about the fine print. She was blinded by her own ego and the desperate need to secure the building to save her own skin from the loan sharks. "Just sign it, Beatrice," Chloe urged, her tone impatient. "It is just standard boilerplate stuff. We need those keys today so the interior decorators can get started." I heard the scratching of a fancy fountain pen against thick parchment paper. Beatrice did not read a single line. She was too busy pretending to be a high society investor to admit she did not understand the legal terminology. She signed her name right on the dotted line, legally pledging the house she stole from me as collateral for a woman who was actively defrauding the federal government and the criminal underworld. "Thank you, ladies," the property manager said, his voice completely professional. The heavy metallic thud of the corporate seal slamming down on the contract echoed through my earpiece. It sounded exactly like the locking mechanism of a prison cell. "Welcome to Rollins Holdings," he concluded. I pulled the earbud out and dropped it into my pocket. It was done. The contract was signed, sealed, and legally binding. They had literally put their own heads inside the noose and handed me the rope. Now all I had to do was wait for Chloe to make her first rent payment using the dirty money she had borrowed from the Southside Syndicate. The moment that illicit cash hit my corporate accounts, the breach of contract would be automatically triggered. I stood up from the park bench, a deep, satisfying warmth spreading through my chest despite the freezing weather. But my quiet moment of victory was abruptly interrupted. 2 city police officers bundled in heavy winter jackets were walking purposefully across the frosted grass, making a direct line for me. I stood my ground, keeping my hands visible as they approached. Desmond Rollins, the taller officer, asked, stopping a few feet away, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "That is me," I replied calmly. We need you to gather your belongings and vacate the premises immediately, the officer said, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Furthermore, we are serving you with an official municipal trespass warning. He pulled a yellow citation ticket from his pocket and shoved it into my chest. I looked down at the paper. What is this? I asked. I am sitting on a public park bench in the middle of the day. Not anymore, the second officer chimed in. The city council just passed an emergency ordinance cracking down on vagrancy in this district. No loitering, no overnight parking, and no camping in any public or private commercial lots without a registered residential address. Your name was specifically flagged by a concerned neighborhood watch committee. We catch you sitting around here again, you are going straight to the county jail. Now move along. A concerned neighborhood watch committee. I clenched my jaw. Chloe again. She had secured her fancy office space, but she could not stand the thought of me simply existing in the same city. She was using her remaining credit and whatever local connections her father had to relentlessly harass me. She was ensuring that I could not even close my eyes on a park bench without the threat of arrest hanging over my head. She wanted me exhausted, terrified, and totally broken before the conservatorship hearing. I did not argue with the officers. I picked up my small duffel bag, slung it over my tired shoulder, and began walking toward the busy downtown intersection. The freezing wind whipped against my face, stinging my cheeks. I was a multimillionaire walking the streets of Chicago like a hunted fugitive. I reached the corner of Michigan Avenue and stopped at a red crosswalk light, waiting for the traffic to pass. The roar of city buses and honking horns filled the air. Suddenly, a brand new silver Mercedes-Benz glided to a smooth halt right in front of where I was standing. The paint was so polished it reflected the gray winter sky. The tinted passenger side window slowly rolled down with a soft mechanical hum. Sitting in the luxurious leather driver's seat, clutching a steering wheel wrapped in imported wood, was Beatrice. She had just come from the leasing office. She was wearing designer sunglasses and a thick cashmere scarf. She leaned across the passenger seat and looked out the window at me. She took in my worn-out work boots, my faded flannel shirt, and the cheap duffel bag slung over my shoulder. A slow, cruel, incredibly ugly smile stretched across her face. Still out here begging on the street, Desmond? She mocked, her voice easily, carrying over the sound of the idling engine. She casually raised her left hand, adjusting her rearview mirror just so I could see the massive sparkling diamond ring she had just purchased with the money she drained from my accounts. You should have just signed the nursing home papers, Des. She laughed, a soulless, wicked sound. Now look at you. You are nothing but trash on the sidewalk. Do not worry, I will make sure the city sanitation department sweeps you up soon. The traffic light turned green. Beatrice revved the powerful engine of the Mercedes and sped off down the avenue, leaving a cloud of cold exhaust fumes washing over me. I stood on the corner watching the sleek silver car disappear into the sea of city traffic. I did not feel humiliated. I did not feel defeated. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and felt the cold, hard edges of the burner phone Julian had given me. Beatrice thought she was driving away in a luxury car paid for by her brilliant legal victory. She did not realize she was actually driving a rented coffin. She had just signed away everything she owned, and Chloe was about to bring the wrath of the criminal underworld right to her doorstep. I smiled, the cold wind biting at my teeth. Laugh while you can, Beatrice, I whispered into the freezing city air, because tomorrow morning I am coming to collect. Exactly 1 week later, the West Loop Commercial District was glowing under the Chicago night sky. I stood across the street in the freezing shadows of an alleyway watching the grand opening of Chloe's fake digital media empire. She had pulled out absolutely all the stops. There were valets in crisp uniforms parking Maseratis and Porsches at the curb. A long red carpet led up to the towering glass doors of the building. Inside, I could see crystal chandeliers casting a warm golden light over a crowd of the city's wealthy elite. Waiters in white gloves drifted through the room carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and towering flutes of $100 champagne. Chloe was spending thousands of dollars of illicit borrowed money to impress venture capitalists and local politicians. She was desperately trying to secure legitimate funding before the violent underground syndicate came looking for their $300,000. It was a beautiful, incredibly expensive house of cards, and she had built it right inside my own property. I stepped out of the shadows and crossed the busy street. I did not wear a tailored tuxedo. I did not rent a luxury car. I wore the exact same grease-stained work jeans, the scuffed steel toe boots, and the frayed flannel shirt I had been wearing since the day they threw me out of my house. I looked exactly like a homeless drifter. I looked exactly like the helpless, senile old man they had described in their court petitions. I walked right past the line of luxury cars. The massive bouncer standing by the velvet rope immediately stepped forward, putting a heavy hand on my chest to stop me. But I knew the architectural layout of this building better than the contractor who poured the concrete. I ignored the bouncer, turned down the narrow side passage, and approached the heavy steel loading dock doors. I lifted the cover of the security keypad and typed in the master override sequence. It was a code known only to the true owner of Rollins Holdings. The heavy steel doors clicked and slid open with a soft mechanical hum. I walked through the back corridors past the catering prep stations and stepped directly into the main ballroom. The contrast was jarring. The string quartet was playing a soft, elegant Mozart piece. The room buzzed with the low, sophisticated chatter of wealthy investors. And right in the center of the room, basking in the flashes of hired photographers, was my daughter-in-law. Chloe was wearing a backless silver sequined gown that probably cost more than my first car. She was holding court, laughing loudly, playing the role of the brilliant young CEO. Standing right beside her was my ex-wife, Beatrice. Beatrice was draped in a ridiculous, oversized white fur stole, wearing a diamond necklace she had undoubtedly purchased using the credit cards she stole in my name. And trailing a few steps behind them, holding Chloe's designer purse and looking like a glorified servant, was my son, Malik. I did not hide. I walked straight into the bright center lights of the ballroom. My heavy steel toe boots echoed sharply against the imported marble floor. One by one, the wealthy guests noticed me. The sophisticated chatter began to die down. The string quartet faltered, the cellist losing his rhythm as he stared at the dirty, ragged old black man walking through their pristine high society party. The crowd naturally parted like the Red Sea, pulling their expensive coats and dresses away from me in disgust. Chloe turned around to see what was causing the commotion. The fake corporate smile instantly froze on her face. The champagne flute in her hand trembled so violently that the golden liquid spilled over the rim and dripped onto the floor. For a split second, the mask slipped entirely. I saw absolute naked, paralyzing terror in her eyes. She was terrified that the wealthy investors surrounding her would realize her perfect, glamorous life was a complete fraud. But Chloe was a master manipulator. She immediately switched gears, transforming from a panicked fraudster into a tragic, suffering victim. "Security," she shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing off the high acoustic ceilings. "Security, get this vagrant out of here right now." She grabbed the arm of an elderly, wealthy investor standing next to her, putting on a flawless face of extreme emotional distress. "I'm so sorry," she lied loudly, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the silent room. "This is my husband's father. He suffers from severe aggressive dementia. He wandered away from his psychiatric care facility. He does not even know where he is. It is a terrible, heartbreaking family tragedy. We are trying to get him the medical help he desperately needs." Two massive private security guards in dark black suits immediately broke through the crowd, rushing toward me with their hands outstretched. But before the guards could grab my arms, Beatrice stepped forward. She wanted her moment in the spotlight. She wanted to prove to this room full of millionaires that she belonged among them. She marched right up to me, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. "You just could not stay in the gutter where you belong," she hissed under her breath, her eyes burning into mine. Then, making a grand theatrical gesture for her captive audience, Beatrice raised her crystal glass of expensive red wine and threw the dark liquid directly onto my chest. The wine splashed violently against my neck, soaking instantly into the frayed fabric of my flannel shirt, dripping down the front of my jacket like dark red blood. The crowd gasped in collective shock. "Get this crazy old fool out of my sight," Beatrice commanded the guards, lifting her chin and playing the role of the ruthless, wealthy matriarch. "Take him straight to the state psychiatric ward. Do not let him back on the streets where he can terrorize decent people." The security guards grabbed me by both arms, their grips tight, heavy, and unforgiving. I did not fight them. I did not struggle. I did not raise pulled me forcefully through the crowd, dragging me toward the main glass exit doors. I saw Malik. He was standing near the edge of the room, gripping Chloe's purse. His eyes were wide with a sickening mixture of deep shame and absolute panic. He was completely paralyzed, watching his mother and his wife humiliate his father in front of the entire city. The guards hauled me right past him. I braced my boots against the marble floor for just one fraction of a second, stopping my backward momentum just enough to lean my head directly next to my son's ear. I did not yell. I did not sound crazy. I dropped my voice into a low, razor-sharp whisper that cut through the noise of the room and landed directly in his brain. Check the name of the parent company on the lease agreement, son. The guards yanked me away before Malik could even process the words. They dragged me roughly through the double glass doors and shoved me out onto the freezing concrete sidewalk. I stumbled but caught my balance, straightening my wine-stained jacket as the heavy doors locked shut behind me. I did not walk away. I stood there in the biting cold wind, looking back through the massive glass windows of the lobby. Inside, the party was desperately trying to resume. The string quartet started playing a lively tune. Chloe was forcefully laughing, touching the arms of the investors, trying to charm them and smooth over the ugly interruption. Beatrice was waving her hand dismissively, accepting sympathetic pats on the back from the other wealthy women. But Malik was not moving. Through the thick glass, I watched my son slowly reach into the inside pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his smartphone. I watched him unlock the screen and open his web browser. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was pulling up the state corporate registry database. He was typing in the name of his wife's new landlord, Rollins Holdings. I stood in the dark, watching his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of his phone screen. I watched the exact second the search results loaded. I watched his eyes scan the digital page, reading the legal registration, the corporate assets, and finally the name of the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the commercial empire that owned the very building they were standing in, Desmond Rollins. Malik stopped breathing. His jaw physically dropped. Every single drop of blood vanished from his face, leaving his skin looking like gray ash. The phone slipped from his trembling, numb fingers and shattered against the hard marble floor. He did not even look down at it. He slowly lifted his heavy head, looking past his laughing, oblivious wife, past his arrogant, cruel mother, straight through the thick glass doors and directly into my eyes. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized the magnitude of the trap they had just locked themselves inside. I stood in the freezing wind, the spilled wine turning cold against my chest. I looked at my terrified son, gave him one slow, deliberate nod, and then turned my back and walked away into the night, leaving him to suffocate in the nightmare he had helped create. I watched the morning sun rise over the Chicago skyline from the panoramic windows of Julian's corner office. The freezing wind was still whipping against the thick glass outside, but inside it was perfectly warm. I was drinking a cup of dark roast coffee from a porcelain mug, dressed in a sharp tailored wool suit that Julian had arranged for me overnight. The days of wearing my faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots were over. The act was finished. I had played the helpless, homeless old man perfectly. Now it was time to execute the final judgment. Julian sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his eyes locked on the dual glowing monitors in front of him. His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. He looked up at me, a cold, predatory smile forming on his face. "The wire transfer for her security deposit cleared at exactly 8 this morning, Mr. Rollins," Julian said, his voice crisp and professional. "And just as we suspected, the funds did not originate from a legitimate business account. The money was wired from a shell company tied directly to the underground lending syndicate on the south side. Dirty money." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Do it, Julian. Pull the trigger." Julian pressed a single key on his keyboard, the heavy, satisfying sound of the enter key echoing in the quiet office. With that one keystroke, a massive automated legal protocol was instantly activated. The personal liability clause that Beatrice had so arrogantly signed without reading was officially triggered. Because Chloe had used illicit, unregistered funds to secure a commercial lease, she was in immediate breach of a federal anti-money laundering contract. Rollins Holdings legally executed an emergency corporate lien. Within 60 seconds, every single bank account tied to Chloe's fake digital media company was frozen. Her personal checking accounts were frozen. Her credit lines were instantly disabled. The financial bloodline of her entire fake empire was completely severed. 10 minutes later, the sleek black phone on Julian's desk began to ring. The caller ID flashed a number I recognized instantly. It was Chloe. Julian looked at me. I gave him a slow nod. He pressed the speakerphone button, filling the large office with the sound of my daughter-in-law's absolute hysteria. "Listen to me, you incompetent fools," Chloe was screaming, her voice shrill and vibrating with sheer panic. I need to speak to the property manager right now. My bank just sent me an emergency fraud alert. All of my corporate operating accounts have been locked by your holding company. I have a major payroll run today. I have vendor invoices. You need to release my funds immediately before I sue this entire building into the ground." Julian leaned forward toward the microphone, his tone entirely unbothered. "Good morning, Mrs. Rollins. You are speaking with the primary legal counsel for Rollins Holdings. There has been no mistake. Your accounts have not been locked due to a banking error. They have been seized under an emergency corporate lien." There was a sudden, breathless pause on the other end of the line. "Seized!" Chloe stammered, the arrogant edge in her voice instantly cracking. "What do you mean seized? You cannot do that." "I signed a legally binding lease agreement yesterday." "That is exactly why we can do it," Julian replied smoothly. "Section 4 of your lease agreement clearly stipulates that the use of illicit, unregistered, or syndicated loan funds to secure a commercial property constitutes an immediate breach of contract. We tracked the routing numbers of your security deposit. The money came from an illegal loan sharking operation. You tried to launder dirty money through our luxury real estate firm." "I am not laundering money," Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching so high it sounded like glass breaking. "It was a private bridge loan from an independent investor. You have no right to touch my personal accounts. Release my money right now. The investors are coming to collect their interest payment by noon today. If I do not wire them that money, they are going to kill my husband." "That sounds like a personal problem, Mrs. Rollins," Julian said coldly. "Our legal department has already forwarded the transaction records to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. Furthermore, to cover the corporate damages of your fraudulent application, we have fully activated the guarantor clause. Have a wonderful day." Wait, please," Chloe begged, but Julian pressed the button, cutting off her desperate cries. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the phone. She was terrified. The violent syndicate she borrowed $300,000 from was expecting their first massive payment in a few hours. Without that money, those criminals were not going to send her a polite warning letter. They were going to show up at her front door with baseball bats. On the other side of the city, inside the luxurious suburban house she had stolen from me, a completely different kind of nightmare was unfolding. I did not need a hidden microphone to know exactly what was happening. Julian's financial dashboard showed us every desperate move they were making in real time. Chloe had dropped her phone and turned her hysterical rage toward my son. She started screaming at Malik, throwing expensive vases against the wall, demanding to know how the holding company had found out about the dirty money. She blamed him. She called him useless. She demanded he fix it. But Malik was not fighting back. Malik was completely paralyzed. Ever since he looked through those glass doors at the grand opening party and searched the corporate registry on his phone, Malik knew the terrifying truth. He knew his own father was the sole owner and chief executive officer of Rollins Holdings. He knew that the homeless, ragged old man he had allowed his wife to throw out onto the street was actually a multi-millionaire real estate titan. He knew that they had not just signed a bad contract. They had willingly walked into a meticulously designed execution chamber built by the very man they had betrayed. "It is him," Malik sobbed, collapsing onto the expensive hardwood floor of the living room, tearing at his own hair. "What are you talking about?" Chloe screamed, kicking a shattered vase across the room. "Who is him? Get up and call the bank, Malik. We are dead if we do not get that money." "It is my father," Malik screamed back, his voice echoing with absolute soul-crushing despair. "Desmond is Rollins Holdings. He owns the building, Chloe. He owns the company. He owns the lease. We just signed over everything to my father. He is the one who froze the accounts. He played us. He played all of us." I could almost see the exact moment the color drained from Chloe's face. The realization hit her like a freight train. The old man she had mocked, the man she had tried to lock away in a state-run psychiatric ward, was the invisible hand choking the life out of her. They had less than 3 hours before the loan sharks came looking for their cash. Pure animalistic survival instinct took over. Chloe grabbed Malik by the collar of his shirt and dragged him out the front door. They drove like maniacs to the one person they believed could save them, Beatrice. Beatrice was sitting in the kitchen of her new stolen home, sipping her morning coffee and admiring her massive diamond ring when Chloe and Malik burst through the front door. They were hyperventilating their clothes, disheveled sweat pouring down their faces despite the freezing winter weather. Mom, you have to help us right now, Malik begged, falling to his knees in front of her kitchen island. Chloe's business accounts are gone. The syndicate is coming for us. They are going to hurt us, Mom. You need to go to the bank immediately. You need to take out a second mortgage on this house. You need to pull out $200,000 in cash right now so we can pay them off and run. Beatrice stood up, her coffee mug shattering on the floor. She did not fully understand the complicated corporate trap they had fallen into, but she understood the sheer terror in her son's eyes. She understood that violent men were coming. "Do not panic," Beatrice commanded, trying to maintain her arrogant posture. "I own this house free and clear. It is worth over $500,000. I will call the bank right now and authorize an emergency line of equity. We will have the cash in an hour. No street thugs are going to touch my family." She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed the premium customer service line for her bank. She put it on speakerphone so Chloe and Malik could hear the salvation she was about to provide. "This is Beatrice Rollins," she barked into the phone, projecting the authority of a wealthy suburban homeowner. "I need an immediate emergency cash wire drawn against the equity of my primary residence. Transfer $200,000 to my checking account right now." There was the sound of rapid typing on the other end of the line. The bank representative paused. "Mrs. Rollins, I am looking at your property profile right now," the representative said, his voice hesitant and confused. "I am so sorry, but I cannot authorize any equity transfers or new lines of credit against this property." "What do you mean you cannot authorize it?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking. "I own this property outright. The divorce judge gave it to me last week. There is no mortgage. Process the transfer immediately." "Mom, the property is no longer unencumbered," the representative explained quietly. "A massive corporate lien was placed on the deed at exactly 8:01 this morning. A commercial real estate firm called Rollins Holdings executed a seizure order based on a personal guarantor contract you signed yesterday. The house is completely locked. You have zero equity available. In fact, according to this file, the property is currently entering the preliminary stages of corporate foreclosure. You do not own this house anymore, Mrs. Rollins." Beatrice dropped the phone. It clattered against the expensive granite countertop. She looked at Chloe, whose face was buried in her hands, weeping uncontrollably. She looked at Malik, who was rocking back and forth on the floor, staring blankly at the wall. In the span of a single morning, the illusion of their wealth had been completely evaporated. The bank accounts were gone. The fake business was destroyed. The stolen house was legally seized. They were trapped in a freezing city with no money, no assets, and a crew of violent loan sharks rapidly closing in on their location. I stood up from the comfortable leather chair in Julian's office and buttoned my tailored suit jacket. I looked out the window at the city I had helped build. "They are ready, Julian," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my shirt. "Call the driver. Bring the car around to the front. We are going to the bank. It is time to look them in the eyes." The central branch of the First Chicago Fidelity Bank is a fortress of polished marble and vaulted ceilings. It is a place designed to make you feel incredibly small. But as I sat in the plush leather chair inside the executive VIP suite sipping a glass of sparkling water, I did not feel small. I felt like the architect of a perfectly designed demolition. Through the thick, frosted glass of the suite, I could see the main lobby, and I could hear them before they even made it past the security desk. Beatrice was screaming. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, shrill and completely unhinged. She marched right up to the priority teller line, pushing past a stunned businessman, and slammed her expensive designer handbag onto the counter. Right behind her was Chloe. Chloe looked like she had aged 10 years in a single morning. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks, and she kept looking over her shoulder at the revolving glass doors, terrified that the South Side Syndicate had followed them downtown. And then there was Malik. My son shuffled into the bank looking like a man walking to his own execution. He knew the truth. He had figured it out last night outside the grand opening party. He knew exactly who owned Rollins Holdings, but Beatrice and Chloe were entirely consumed by their own arrogant desperation. Beatrice refused to believe that the man she had thrown on the street was capable of orchestrating this. She thought it was just a banking error, a massive corporate mistake that she could fix by yelling at a manager. "Unlock my accounts right this second," Beatrice shrieked at the terrified young teller behind the glass. "I demand an emergency equity line. You people have illegally frozen my property. I am a premier client. I own a $500,000 estate free and clear. If you do not wire $200,000 into my daughter-in-law's account in the next 5 minutes, I will personally sue this entire institution into bankruptcy," the teller stammered frantically, typing on her keyboard. "Ma'am, I am looking at your file. I cannot bypass a corporate lien. The system will not physically allow me to authorize a withdrawal. Then get someone out here who can." Chloe screamed, slamming both of her hands against the glass partition. "You do not understand. We need that money right now. People are coming for us. They are going to kill my husband. Release my business funds immediately." Malik stood a few feet behind them, his shoulders slumped, his eyes glued to the floor. "Mom, stop," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Chloe, just stop. You do not understand what is happening." "Shut up, Malik," Chloe snapped, turning her hysterical rage on him. "We are not giving up. We are going to get our money and we are going to get on a plane." The commotion was causing a massive scene. The other wealthy clients in the lobby were staring in absolute shock. 2 large security guards began to approach, placing their hands on their radios. From inside the VIP suite, Julian stood beside me, looking quietly through the frosted glass. "They are completely out of control, Mr. Rollins," Julian said, adjusting his tailored tie. "Do you want me to have security throw them out?" "No," I replied calmly, setting my glass of water down on the mahogany table. "Let the regional manager handle it." We instructed him on exactly what to say. Right on cue, the heavy wooden door behind the teller station opened. The regional manager, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Vance, stepped out into the lobby. He was a man used to dealing with extremely wealthy individuals, and he looked at Beatrice and Chloe with absolute freezing disdain. "Ladies," Mr. Vance said, his voice projecting across the silent lobby. "I am the regional director of this branch. I need you to lower your voices immediately, or I will have you forcibly removed for disturbing the peace." Beatrice puffed out her chest, trying to leverage the fake wealth she had stolen from me. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. "I am Beatrice Rollins. Someone from a company called Rollins Holdings placed a fraudulent lien on my estate this morning. They froze my daughter-in-law's business accounts. It is a scam. I demand that you override this hold and release my equity right now." Mr. Vance did not flinch. He walked slowly around the counter and stood directly in front of them, folding his hands together in a posture of complete authority. "Mrs. Rollins, I have personally reviewed your file," Mr. Vance said, his tone completely devoid of any customer service warmth. "There is no scam. You signed a legally binding commercial guarantor contract yesterday. Your daughter-in-law subsequently breached that contract by attempting to use illicit, unregistered funds from a known criminal syndicate to secure a luxury lease. That triggered a federal anti-money laundering protocol." Chloe gasped, stepping back as if she had been physically struck in the chest. "You are both deeply implicated in federal financial fraud," Mr. Vance continued relentlessly. "The corporate lien placed on your property and your accounts is completely ironclad. There is absolutely nothing this bank can do for you. You have zero equity. You have zero funds. You are currently holding accounts with severe negative balances due to the penalty fees. This is illegal," Beatrice screamed, her face turning a bright, furious red. "I will call the police. I will call the Federal Banking Commission. You cannot just let some faceless corporation steal my house in the middle of the night. Tell me who authorized this. I want to speak to the head of your fraud department. I will destroy whoever did this." Mr. Vance looked at Beatrice with a cold, almost pitying expression. He slowly shook his head. "You are fundamentally misunderstanding the situation, Mrs. Rollins," Mr. Vance said, his voice echoing perfectly in the quiet marble lobby. "This freeze order did not come from our fraud department. It did not come from the bank at all." Beatrice froze, her mouth hanging slightly open. "Then who did it come from?" she demanded. Mr. Vance slowly raised his hand and pointed directly at the heavy frosted glass doors of the VIP suite. "It came from our largest private shareholder," Mr. Vance said smoothly. "The chief executive officer of Rollins Holdings. And he is sitting right over there." Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Malik dropped his head into his hands, completely defeated, his knees buckling slightly. Beatrice slowly turned her head, her arrogant eyes following Mr. Vance's pointing finger toward the VIP suite. Inside the room, I stood up. The room, I was no longer wearing the faded flannel shirt. I was no longer wearing the grease-stained jeans or the scuffed steel toe boots that I had worn for 40 years to quietly build my empire. I was wearing a custom-tailored midnight blue Italian wool suit. I wore a crisp white silk shirt, a platinum watch that cost more than Beatrice's entire stolen car, and perfectly polished Oxford shoes. I looked exactly like the ruthless multimillionaire corporate titan that I had secretly been for decades. I gave Julian a slight nod. Julian reached out and pushed the heavy frosted glass door open. I stepped out of the VIP suite and into the bright lights of the main banking lobby. The sharp, authoritative click of my leather shoes against the marble floor rang out like gunshots in the dead silence of the room. I walked slowly, projecting absolute power and untouchable wealth with every single step. I stopped a few feet away from the three people who had thrown me onto the freezing street just 1 week ago. A dead, suffocating silence enveloped the entire lobby. Beatrice stared at me. Her eyes were completely wide, her pupils dilated in absolute mind-shattering shock. She looked at my custom suit. She looked at my platinum watch. She looked at the regional bank manager standing respectfully behind me. Her brain was violently trying to process the impossible reality standing right in front of her face. The useless, broke, senile old man she had discarded like garbage was the billionaire architect of her total destruction. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice deep, calm, and echoing with absolute authority. "It looks like you are having some trouble with your accounts. Let us see if we can clear that up." The silence in the grand marble lobby was so profound I could hear the faint hum of the security cameras. Beatrice stared at my custom-tailored suit, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She looked at the platinum watch on my wrist, then back up to my face, desperately searching for the tired, broken old man she had thrown onto the freezing pavement just days ago. He was dead. In his place stood the architect of her absolute ruin. "This is a trick," Beatrice suddenly screamed, her shrill voice shattering the quiet room. "This is a scam. It is an illusion. You are a retired audio engineer. You are a blue-collar nobody. You do not own a holding company. You do not own anything. You are trying to humiliate me with fake lawyers and rented suits." Chloe was hyperventilating beside her. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the marble teller counter just to stay standing. She looked at Julian taking in his $1,000 briefcase and his ruthless professional posture. She knew this was not a trick. She knew the corporate lien that had just obliterated her bank accounts was completely real. How Chloe stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "How could you possibly own the West Loop building? We researched the landlord. It is a massive corporate entity." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I took one slow step forward, projecting a calm, lethal authority that made both of them physically shrink back. I gestured to Julian. He stepped forward, unlatched his leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick, legal-sized folder. He handed it to me. I took the heavy stack of documents and slapped them down onto the polished marble counter right in front of Beatrice and Chloe. "Read it," I commanded, my voice echoing like a judge handing down a final sentence. Beatrice leaned forward, her hands trembling as she looked at the top page. It was an official, certified escrow statement from the very bank we were standing inside. The logo of Rollins Holdings was embossed at the top, and right below it, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, was the liquid cash balance, $45 million. Beatrice gasped, stumbling backward as if the paper had physically burned her. Her eyes bulged out of her skull. She raised a shaking hand to her mouth, unable to process the number she had just read. 45 million. Beatrice choked out the air, completely leaving her lungs. "Desmond, where did this come from? How is this possible? You never told me. We were married for 40 years. I smiled, a cold, empty expression that carried absolutely no warmth. "I bought those rotting warehouses in the West Loop back in the 1980s, Beatrice the First explained, keeping my tone terrifyingly level. "I bought them for pennies while you were busy complaining about the grease stains on my hands. I built a shadow empire right under your nose. I hid it behind a blind corporate trust because I knew exactly who you were. I knew that if you ever saw real money, your greed would completely consume you. And you proved me right the moment you filed for divorce and tried to leave me with nothing." Chloe pushed past Beatrice, her eyes frantically scanning the next document in the stack. It was the commercial lease agreement she had signed just yesterday. "You wanted to play corporate shark, Chloe," I said, turning my gaze to her. "You wanted to sit in a glass office and pretend you were a powerful CEO. But you are not a mogul. You are a desperate, sloppy fraud, and you walked right into the most basic legal trap imaginable." "That is illegal," Chloe shrieked, tears of sheer panic finally spilling down her cheeks. You cannot do this. You tricked me into signing that lease. You trapped me. I did not trick you into anything, I replied smoothly. You are the one who borrowed $300,000 from a violent underground syndicate. You are the one who attempted to wire illegal unregistered funds to secure a luxury property. You committed federal financial fraud, Chloe. All I did was enforce the anti-money laundering protocol written into the contract you were too arrogant to read. I reached out and tapped the final page of the contract with my index finger. But the best part of this entire transaction, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, devastating rumble, is the personal guarantor clause. Because your fake media company had no financial history, you needed someone with unencumbered assets to co-sign the lease. You needed someone to put their property on the line just in case you defaulted. Beatrice suddenly let out a gut-wrenching wail. The realization finally struck her. The arrogance that had fueled her for decades evaporated in an instant, replaced by pure, blinding horror. You signed it, Beatrice, I said, staring directly into her terrified eyes. You pledged the house you stole from me. You put it up as collateral for a woman who is actively defrauding the federal government and the criminal underworld. The moment her dirty money hit my corporate accounts, you breached the contract. I picked up the signed document and held it up so they could clearly see their own signatures written in blue ink. The house you kicked me out of, Beatrice, and the fake company you tried to build, Chloe, are now legally owned by me. I announced every word, landing like a physical blow. Your signatures are right here. You handed my empire right back to me on a silver platter. You have absolutely nothing left. Chloe completely shattered. Her mind broke under the crushing weight of her own greed. She had no money. She had no business. She had no house. And in less than an hour, the ruthless loan sharks she had borrowed from were going to come looking for their cash. She spun around, her face twisted in a mask of absolute feral rage. She did not attack me. She knew I was untouchable. Instead, she turned her hysterical fury onto the weakest target in the room. She lunged at Malik. You knew, Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing wildly through the bank lobby. You knew he was a multi-millionaire. You hid this from me. You let me walk into a trap. You set me up to be murdered by those people. Malik held his hands up defensively, weeping openly, a grown man crying like a terrified child. Chloe, no, I swear I did not know. He hid it from me, too. I am just as broke as you are. I swear to God. Chloe did not listen. She raised her hand and delivered a vicious full-force slap directly across Malik's face. The sharp crack echoed loudly in the silent room. Malik stumbled backward, losing his footing, and collapsed onto the polished marble floor. He lay there, holding his bright red cheek, weeping pathetically in front of the bank staff, the security guards, and his own father. He had betrayed me to please a woman who despised him. He had sold his grandmother's legacy for a wife who was now standing over him, screaming that she wished she had never met him. I looked down at my son crying on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I turned my attention back to Beatrice, who was violently trembling, gasping for air as if she were having a heart attack. She knew what was coming next. The financial ruin was only the beginning. The real consequences of their actions were already waiting for them outside the bank doors. The sharp echo of the slap Chloe had just delivered to Malik still hung in the heavy air of the bank lobby. My son was on his knees on the polished marble floor, clutching his bright red cheek. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life I saw absolutely nothing of myself in him. He was a hollow, empty shell of a man who had sold his soul for a woman who had just publicly humiliated him. Malik realized that his entire world had just evaporated. His wife hated him, his fake wealth was gone, and the father he had betrayed was standing above him, wielding the power of a $45 million empire. He scrambled forward on his knees, his expensive designer pants sliding against the cold stone floor. He reached out with trembling, sweaty hands and desperately grabbed the perfectly tailored fabric of my suit trousers. "Dad, please," Malik sobbed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Dad, you have to stop this. I am your son. I am your own flesh and blood. You cannot do this to me." I was confused. Chloe at the man clutching my leg. I felt no at the man clutching my leg. I felt no anger. I felt no sorrow. I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. Before I could say a word, Beatrice suddenly dropped to her knees right next to him. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch who had thrown wine on me just 24 hours ago was now weeping uncontrollably, her expensive mascara running down her face in thick, dark streaks. She grabbed my other hand, completely abandoning any shred of dignity she had left. "Desmond, please listen to him," Beatrice wailed, her voice shaking violently. "We spent 40 years together, Des. 40 years of marriage. We built a family. We shared a life. You cannot just erase 4 decades of history over a mistake. I was angry about the divorce. I was not thinking straight. But deep down, I still love you. We are your family. You are a good Christian man, Desmond. A good man forgives his family." I stared at her. She was actually wearing the massive diamond ring she had bought with my stolen money while begging me for mercy. It was a spectacular display of absolute hypocrisy. 40 years. Beatrice. I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that forced her to look me directly in the eyes. "Just 1 week ago, you stood on the porch of the house I paid for. You watched me walk out into the freezing night with nothing but 2 plastic bags. Do you remember what you said to me? You laughed in my face and said that at my age nobody needs me anymore. You said I was just a useless burden." Beatrice choked on a sob, shaking her head frantically. "I did not mean it, Des. I was just angry. I swear I did not mean it." I slowly pulled my hand out of her desperate grip. I reached into the inside pocket of my midnight blue suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout. I simply tapped the screen, opened my audio files, and turned the volume all the way to maximum. "You want to talk about family," I said, looking down at Chloe, who was standing frozen against the teller counter, her eyes wide with terror. "Let us remind everyone in this room exactly how you treat family." I pressed play. The audio recording from the private alcove of the expensive French restaurant blared out of the phone speaker, echoing perfectly off the vaulted marble ceilings of the bank. The sound quality was crystal clear. First, Beatrice's recorded voice filled the lobby, cruel and mocking. "Stop acting like you have options. We are here to do you a favor before you freeze to death in whatever gutter you are sleeping in tonight. Sign the paper, Desmond. Give Malik full power of attorney and go quietly." Beatrice covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a horrified gasp as she heard her own venomous words being broadcast to the entire bank staff and the wealthy clients standing in the lobby. But the recording was not finished. Next came Chloe's voice, vibrating with pure aggressive malice. "If you refuse to sign this, Des, I will make sure the rest of your short life is a living hell. We will drag you through the court system until you are bleeding from the eyes. I will hire experts to testify that you are a violent schizophrenic. I will lock you away in a state-run psychiatric ward where nobody will ever listen to a word you say. You have no money. You have no home. You have no power. You are nothing. Sign the paper or I will personally destroy you." I pressed pause. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The bank tellers behind the glass partitions were staring at Chloe and Beatrice with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. Mr. Vance, the regional bank manager, crossed his arms over his chest, looking at the 3 of them as if they were a disease. I looked down at Malik, who was still clutching my trousers, weeping into the fabric. "You sat right there while your wife threatened to lock me in an asylum, and you did not say a single word to defend me." I took a slow, deliberate step back, forcing Malik to lose his grip on my leg. He reached for me again, but I violently swatted his hand away. "Do not touch me!" I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "You stole your dead grandmother's vintage locket and pawned it to pay for your wife's luxury credit card debt. You sold the only piece of my mother I had left in this world. You are a coward. You are a thief. And as of this moment, you are no longer my son. You are nothing to me." "Dad, no." Malik screamed, burying his face in his hands. I turned my back on him. I looked at Beatrice, who was still sobbing on the floor, and Chloe, who looked like she was about to pass out from sheer panic. "I sat at that dinner table and gave you one final generous opportunity to be human beings," I said, my voice completely devoid of any empathy. "I gave you the chance to walk away. Instead, you chose to be monsters. And now you get to live in the nightmare you created." I turned to the regional bank manager. "Mr. Vance," I said calmly, adjusting the cuffs of my suit, "remove this garbage from my bank. Mr. Vance, remove this garbage from my bank." Mr. Vance did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Security," he barked, pointing a firm finger at the three of them. "Escort them off the premises immediately. If they resist, call the Chicago Police Department and have them arrested for criminal trespassing." Two massive, broad-shouldered security guards immediately stepped forward. They grabbed Malik by the armpits and hauled him to his feet. He went completely limp, sobbing hysterically as they dragged him across the marble floor. Another guard grabbed Beatrice by the arm. She tried to resist, screaming my name, begging for one more chance, but the guard effortlessly pulled her toward the exit. Her expensive fur coat slipped off her shoulder, dragging on the floor behind her. Chloe did not need to be grabbed. She was backing away, her eyes darting wildly around the room, hyperventilating. She stumbled backward, her high heels clicking erratically, until a guard stepped behind her and firmly pushed her toward the revolving glass doors. Julian stepped up beside me. We stood in silence, watching the security guards physically throw my former family out into the freezing Chicago wind. They stumbled onto the concrete sidewalk, shivering, crying, and completely destroyed. Julian checked his luxury watch. "Perfect timing, Mr. Rollins," he murmured, pointing through the massive front windows of the bank lobby. I looked out onto the street. Chloe had just regained her balance on the sidewalk, pulling her thin designer coat around her shivering shoulders. She looked up, and I watched the exact moment her heart stopped beating. A massive blacked-out Lincoln Navigator had just pulled up to the curb, illegally parking directly in front of the bank. Right behind it, a dark, unmarked SUV screeched to a halt. The heavy doors of the vehicles swung open simultaneously. Four massive men stepped out onto the sidewalk. They were wearing thick leather jackets and dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. They did not look like corporate lawyers. They looked like exactly what they were, enforcers for the Southside Underground Lending Syndicate. They had come to collect their $300,000. Through the thick glass of the bank window, I watched Chloe freeze in absolute paralyzing terror. She had no business. She had no bank accounts. She had no money to pay them. The lead enforcer, a man with a thick scar across his jaw, walked slowly up to her, blocking her path down the sidewalk. Beatrice and Malik backed away, pressing themselves against the cold stone exterior of the bank building, terrified of the violent men surrounding them. Julian let out a low, dark chuckle. "It looks like your daughter-in-law has a highly anticipated meeting with her new investors." I watched the enforcer grab Chloe roughly by the arm. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply turned my back to the window, walked back toward the VIP suite, and let karma collect its debts. I sat in the back seat of my private luxury car, parked discreetly half a block away from the beautiful suburban brick house I had spent 30 years paying off. The engine hummed quietly, keeping the cabin perfectly warm against the bitter Chicago winter outside. I was holding a fresh cup of coffee, watching the scene unfold through the heavily tinted windows. Karma is a very patient collector, but when it finally arrives to collect its debts, it puts on a spectacular show. There were two Cook County Sheriff vehicles parked right in the middle of my old driveway. Their emergency lights were flashing bright red and blue, casting long, dramatic shadows across the frosted front lawn. Four burly deputies were actively walking in and out of the front door, carrying heavy boxes and pieces of expensive furniture and unceremoniously dumping them right onto the frozen grass. Julian had executed the corporate foreclosure with absolutely zero mercy. When Beatrice breached the guarantor contract by backing Chloe's fraudulent media company, she surrendered every legal right she had to that property. Rollins Holdings now owned the house, and as the chief executive officer, I had ordered an immediate emergency eviction. I watched as a deputy carried out a massive custom-made Italian leather armchair. He did not set it down gently. He tossed it onto the lawn, letting it roll onto the cold, hard dirt. Next came boxes of designer shoes, expensive crystal vases, and fancy kitchenware. Just 1 week ago, Beatrice had stood on that exact same porch with a smug smile on her face. She had handed me 2 cheap plastic trash bags containing a few of my old flannel shirts and told me to get off her property. She had thrown me out into the freezing night to sleep in a rusted, broken-down RV without a single dime to my name. I wanted to be here today to watch the universe return the favor. A beat-up Yellow City taxi suddenly sped around the corner and slammed on its brakes right in front of the house. The rear door flew open, and Beatrice stumbled out. She looked absolutely frantic. She had just fled the terrifying scene at the downtown bank, leaving Chloe and Malik behind to deal with the violent loan sharks. Beatrice had likely assumed she could just run back to her suburban sanctuary, lock the heavy oak doors, and hide from the consequences of her greed. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, she froze. Her eyes went wide as she stared at the flashing police lights. She looked at the heavy leather armchair resting in the dirt. She looked at her boxes of expensive clothing scattered across the frozen grass. The taxi driver honked his horn loudly, yelling out his window, "Hey lady, you owe me $45. Beatrice ignored him. She was hyperventilating, her hands pulling nervously at her expensive hair. She began to run up the driveway, her high heels clicking frantically against the concrete. "What are you doing?" Beatrice shrieked at the top of her lungs, waving her arms at the deputies. "Stop touching my things! Put that down immediately! This is my house! I own this house free and clear! You are making a terrible mistake!" A tall sheriff deputy holding a clipboard and wearing a heavy winter jacket stepped directly into her path, blocking her from reaching the front door. "Are you Beatrice Rollins?" the deputy asked, his voice firm and completely devoid of any sympathy. "Yes, I am Beatrice Rollins," she screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. "And I demand that you get off my property right now before I call my lawyer and have you all fired." The deputy did not even blink. He simply held up a thick stack of legal documents clamped to his clipboard. "You no longer have a property, ma'am," the deputy stated clearly. "This estate has been legally seized by a commercial entity known as Rollins Holdings due to a massive breach of contract. A federal judge signed the emergency eviction order this morning. We are executing a corporate lockout. You have been legally evicted." Beatrice gasped, stumbling backward as if the deputy had physically pushed her. "No," Beatrice wailed, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. "No, you do not understand. My ex-husband owns that company. He is doing this to punish me. It is a domestic dispute. You cannot just throw my things on the street." "Mom, I do not care about your family drama," the deputy replied coldly. "The legal paperwork is completely flawless. The deed has already been transferred. You need to gather whatever belongings are currently on the lawn and vacate the premises immediately. If you attempt to enter this house, I will arrest you for criminal trespassing." Beatrice collapsed onto her knees right there in the driveway. She looked around at the scattered boxes, the expensive furniture sitting in the freezing mud, and the designer dresses blowing in the cold wind. Through the tinted window of my car, I noticed the neighbors. The same wealthy, judgmental neighbors Beatrice used to host fancy wine nights for. The same people she used to boast to about her perfect, sophisticated life. They were all standing on their porches or peeking through their living room blinds, watching her absolute public humiliation. They were pointing at her. They were whispering. She was no longer the arrogant queen of the neighborhood. She was a pathetic, bankrupt woman sitting in the dirt. Beatrice was shivering violently. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the front door of the house that had been permanently locked against her. She had nowhere to go. Her bank accounts were millions of dollars in the negative. Her credit cards were frozen. Her son was penniless. Her daughter-in-law was currently dealing with the criminal underworld. Beatrice was completely alone. She reached into her pocket with shaking hands and pulled out her smartphone. Inside the quiet cabin of my car, my personal cell phone began to ring, the screen illuminated with Beatrice's name. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of the silence. On the 5th ring, I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. I just listened to her breathe. Desmond. Beatrice sobbed into the receiver, her voice a ragged, desperate plea. "Desmond, please, you have to tell them to stop. The police are here. They are throwing all of my beautiful things onto the grass. They will not let me inside. It is freezing out here, Des. I have no money to pay the taxi driver. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. Please, you have to help me." I looked through the car window, watching her kneel in the driveway, holding the phone to her ear, begging the man she had tried to destroy. "You are a billionaire, Desmond," she cried, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You have $45 million. You do not need this house. Please just let me stay." I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I let Chloe get into my head. I let the greed blind me, but we were married for 40 years. We can fix this. I can be a good wife to you again. I will cook your favorite meals. I will take care of you. We can forget all of this ever happened. Just please call the sheriff and tell them to let me go home. I sat in the comfortable leather seat of my car, feeling absolutely nothing for the weeping woman on the other end of the line. She did not love me. She did not regret what she did to me. She only regretted that she had lost. If I had truly been a broke, helpless old man, she would have let me freeze to death in that RV without a second thought. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her heart pound with false hope. "Look at the grass, Beatrice," I said, my voice completely smooth, calm and terrifyingly cold. "What?" she whimpered, confused by my command. "Look at your expensive clothes scattered in the freezing mud," I instructed her. "Look at your fancy furniture sitting in the dirt. Do you remember the 2 plastic trash bags you handed me last week? Do you remember how you smiled when I carried them to my broken-down vehicle?" "Desmond, please do not do this," Beatrice sobbed, finally realizing that her manipulation was not going to work. I leaned closer to the phone. I made sure my voice matched the exact arrogant tone she had used on me the morning of our divorce. I delivered the final devastating blow with perfect surgical precision. "At your age, Beatrice, nobody needs you anymore. You are just a burden. Have fun living on the street." "No, Desmond, wait!" Beatrice screamed into the phone. I ended the call. I did not just hang up. I pulled the protective case off the back of the phone and popped out the small plastic SIM card. I held the tiny chip between my thumb and forefinger and snapped it cleanly in half. I dropped the broken pieces into the small ashtray in the center console. That was it. The final thread connecting me to the toxic, greedy life I had lived was permanently severed. I had zero obligations to that woman or the ungrateful son we had raised. I had given them every chance to be decent human beings, and they had chosen to be monsters. Now they were going to have to survive in the cold, harsh world they had created for themselves. I tapped the glass partition separating the back seat from the driver. "We are done here," I told the driver, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Take me back to the corporate office. I have an empire to run." The luxury car pulled away from the curb smoothly and silently, leaving the suburban street behind. I did not look back out the window. I did not need to see Beatrice weeping on the frozen lawn. The past was completely dead, and my future was waiting. I sat in the mahogany leather chair of my corporate office, watching the city of Chicago move far below me. The massive flat-screen monitor on the wall was playing the local news on mute, but my attention was completely focused on the heavy, classified dossier Julian had just placed on my desk. "It is done, Mr. Rollins." Julian said, his voice entirely clinical and precise. "I just got off the phone with the lead investigator at the Federal Financial Crimes Division. We handed over every single document, the forged signatures on the Small Business Administration loan applications, the digital wire transfers from the Southside Syndicate, the fraudulent commercial lease agreement she signed with our holding company. They have it all." I opened the dossier. Inside were copies of the federal arrest warrants. Chloe thought she was playing a high-stakes game of corporate chess. She thought she could borrow money from violent street thugs, use my military veteran status to secure federal loans, and lie her way into the upper echelon of Chicago society. She did not realize that the federal government does not play games. When you defraud the United States government and attempt to launder illicit syndicate money through a commercial real estate firm, they do not just send a collection letter. They send the FBI. "I want eyes on the arrest, Julian," I said, closing the file. "I want to know the exact moment she is in custody." Julian tapped his tablet. "We have a private investigator parked right outside their luxury townhouse in Lincoln Park. She barely survived her encounter with the loan sharks outside the bank yesterday. They gave her 24 hours to produce the $300,000, or they promised to take it out of her skin. She has been inside the townhouse frantically packing suitcases all morning. She is trying to flee the country." "She is not going anywhere," I replied, turning my chair to look out the window. Across the city in the wealthy manicured neighborhood of Lincoln Park, Chloe was tearing through her expensive walk-in closet. She was shoving designer dresses, handbags, and whatever loose jewelry she had left into a massive leather suitcase. She was hyperventilating, completely consumed by the blind, animalistic terror of a cornered rat. The loan sharks were coming. She had no money. Her accounts were seized. Her husband was useless. Her only thought was to get to O'Hare Airport and disappear on a flight to anywhere. Malik was sitting on the edge of their king-sized bed, staring blankly at the floor. He was not packing. He was not speaking. He was completely broken. The reality of his situation had finally crushed whatever was left of his spine. "Get up and help me," Chloe screamed at him, hurling a pair of expensive shoes into her suitcase. "We have to leave right now. Call an Uber. My credit cards are dead, so use whatever cash you have in your wallet. Move Malik." Malik slowly looked up at the woman he had sold his soul to. Please. I do not have any cash, Chloe, he whispered, his voice completely hollow. I do not have anything. My father took it all. Chloe let out a sound of pure, unhinged frustration. She zipped up the heavy suitcase, her hands shaking violently. You are pathetic, she hissed, grabbing the handle. I never should have married you. You were supposed to be my ticket to a comfortable life, but you are just as useless as your crazy old father. I am leaving. If those men show up, you deal with them. She turned and marched out of the bedroom, dragging the heavy suitcase down the hardwood stairs. She reached the front door, her heart pounding with the desperate hope of escape. She reached out, unlocked the deadbolt, and threw the front door open. She did not find an empty street. She found a wall of dark blue windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across the back. 6 federal agents were standing on her front porch. 2 local Chicago police cruisers were blocking her driveway, their red and blue lights flashing silently in the cold morning air. Chloe Rollins, the lead federal agent, barked, stepping immediately into the doorway, completely blocking her path. Chloe gasped, dropping the handle of her suitcase. It crashed heavily onto the expensive hardwood floor. She stumbled backward, raising her trembling hands to her mouth. No, she whimpered. No, please. I am leaving. I have a flight. You are not going anywhere, ma'am, the agent said, stepping into the foyer and grabbing her by the arm. You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Do not touch me! Chloe shrieked instantly, devolving into total hysteria. She tried to rip her arm away, kicking out wildly at the agent. This is a mistake. I am a legitimate business owner. My father-in-law set me up. He is the one you want. He is a billionaire. The agent did not entertain her delusion for a single second. He swiftly spun her around, forcing her hands behind her back. The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly in the foyer. Upstairs, Malik heard the screaming. He slowly walked down the stairs, his eyes wide with horror as he watched 2 federal agents drag his struggling, weeping wife out the front door. They did not put her in the back of the car quietly. They dragged her down the front walkway in broad daylight. The wealthy neighbors of Lincoln Park were standing on their porches holding their morning coffees, watching the neighborhood snob get hauled away in federal handcuffs. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, her designer clothes rumpled, her makeup ruined. The pristine, sophisticated image she had spent years carefully crafting was completely destroyed in front of the very people she had tried so desperately to impress. The agents shoved her into the back of the unmarked federal vehicle and slammed the door shut. One of the agents walked back up the driveway and stopped right in front of Malik, who was standing paralyzed on the porch. Are you Malik Rollins? The agent asked. Malik slowly nodded, too terrified to speak. Your wife is facing decades in federal prison, the agent said coldly. The assets in this house, including the vehicles in the driveway, were purchased with fraudulent funds. They are officially seized by the federal government. You have 10 minutes to gather whatever clothing you can carry and vacate the premises. Malik stood shivering in the freezing Chicago wind. 10 minutes. That was all he had left. He gathered a few shirts and pants into a black garbage bag. He had no luggage. He had no car. He had no wife. He had no mother, because Beatrice was currently sleeping on a cot in a cheap downtown shelter after being evicted. And he had no father, because I had cut him out of my life permanently. Malik walked out of the luxury townhouse carrying a garbage bag over his shoulder. He walked for 3 miles until his designer shoes gave him blisters. He used the last $40 in his pocket to rent a room at a roach-infested, miserable roadside motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. He sat on the stained, sagging mattress, listening to the sound of sirens blaring on the highway outside. He pulled out his phone. He dialed my number, hoping, begging for some tiny shred of mercy from the man he had betrayed. He heard 3 automated beeps, then a cold, robotic voice filled the line. We are sorry. The number you have reached has been disconnected and is no longer in service. Malik dropped the phone onto the dirty carpet and buried his face in his hands, completely alone in the world. 3 weeks later, the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open. The courtroom was packed. Chloe's crimes had made the local news. The ambitious, glamorous socialite who had tried to launder syndicate money through a commercial real estate empire was facing a federal judge for her preliminary hearing. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. I was not there as a spectator. I was not there as a grieving father-in-law. I was there as the primary victim of her commercial lease fraud. I was the chief executive officer of Rollins Holdings. I wore a charcoal gray bespoke suit, a silk tie, and carried a quiet, undeniable aura of absolute power. The chatter in the gallery died down as I walked past the wooden benches and took my seat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's table. I looked toward the defense table. Chloe was sitting there. She was not wearing her expensive cashmere coats or her designer heels. She was wearing a baggy, bright orange county jail jumpsuit. Her hair was greasy and pulled back into a messy knot. Her skin was pale and dark, exhausted circles framed her eyes. The reality of a concrete cell and a metal toilet had completely broken her spirit. She slowly turned her head and looked back into the gallery. Her eyes found mine. The moment she saw me sitting there looking like the multi-millionaire titan I truly was, a visceral shudder ran through her entire body. The sheer, venomous hatred that flared in her eyes was toxic. She glared at me with the absolute fury of a woman who knew she had been completely outsmarted and utterly destroyed by the one person she had considered entirely worthless. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply stared back at her, my face a mask of cold, unbothered stone. I slowly crossed my arms over my chest and gave her a very slight, terrifyingly calm nod. The judge walked into the courtroom and the bailiff called for everyone to rise. The final act of this war was about to begin, and I was going to make sure she felt every single second of it. The federal courtroom was as cold, hard, and unforgiving as a steel vault. The heavy mahogany panels, the towering seal of the United States government, and the elevated bench of the federal judge were all specifically designed to make criminals realize that their games were officially over. I sat in the very front row of the gallery wearing my charcoal gray bespoke suit, holding a classic felt fedora. Just watched the final act of the play. I had directed. Chloe sat at the defense table. The vibrant, arrogant woman who had smirked at me while sipping expensive red wine on the porch of my stolen house was completely gone. The ruthless corporate shark who had threatened to lock me in a psychiatric ward was dead. She looked completely hollowed out. The bright orange jumpsuit of the county jail swallowed her thin, trembling frame. Her hair, which used to be perfectly styled by expensive salons, was greasy and pulled back into a messy knot. Her skin was pale and sallow. Every time the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom opened behind us, she flinched visibly. She was terrified that the South Side Syndicate had somehow sent an enforcer into the federal building to collect her debt. The federal prosecutor stood at the podium, methodically tearing her life apart piece by piece. He did not need to raise his voice or perform theatrics. The mountain of evidence I had provided spoke for itself. He laid out the forged signatures on the Small Business Administration loan applications. He presented the digital wire transfers proving she attempted to launder illicit syndicate money through a commercial real estate lease. He painted a picture of a woman entirely consumed by greed, a woman who believed she was smarter than the federal government and untouchable by the law. Her public defender, a tired-looking man wearing a cheap wrinkled suit, stood up to offer a pathetic plea for leniency. He tried to argue that Chloe was a victim of circumstance. He claimed she was overwhelmed by marital debt, that she was manipulated by bad actors in the underground lending world, that she was just a desperate young woman trying to keep her family afloat. It was a disgusting, insulting display of fiction. I remembered her leaning across the table at that French restaurant, her eyes flashing with pure malice as she threatened to bleed me dry in legal fees until I was starving on the sidewalk. That was not a desperate woman. That was a vicious, calculating predator. And now the predator was caught in a steel trap she could not chew her way out of. The federal judge, an older, stern-looking woman with an aura of absolute terrifying authority, peered down over her reading glasses. She was not buying a single word of the defense attorney's pathetic narrative. She flipped through the massive binder of evidence Julian had handed over to the FBI. The judge explicitly noted the sheer audacity of using a military veteran's identity to secure federal funding. She highlighted the unmitigated arrogance of attempting to defraud a massive corporate entity like Rollins Holdings with dirty street money. Before handing down the sentence, the judge gave Chloe one final opportunity to address the court. Chloe slowly stood up. Her legs were trembling so badly that she had to grip the edge of the wooden defense table just to keep from collapsing. She did not look at the judge. She turned her head and looked directly across the room at me. Tears were streaming down her pale, unwashed face. Her eyes begged me for a mercy she had never once shown me. She wanted me to stand up and tell the judge to go easy on her. She wanted the helpless, senile old man she had tormented to magically transform into a forgiving father figure. She wanted me to save her. I looked back at her with eyes as cold and empty as the winter wind coming off Lake Michigan. I did not blink. I did not nod. I did not show a single ounce of human pity. I simply watched her suffer, absorbing the terror radiating from her shivering body. "Your Honor," Chloe sobbed, her voice echoing weakly in the massive, quiet room. "I am so sorry. I made terrible mistakes. I lost my way. I lost my marriage. I lost everything I ever cared about. Please, I am begging you for leniency. I cannot survive in a federal prison. I am not a real criminal. I was just scared." The judge leaned forward, her expression turning to pure, unforgiving granite. "You are the exact definition of a criminal, Mrs. Rollins," the judge stated, her voice slicing through Chloe's pathetic tears like a sharpened blade. "You orchestrated a complex, multi-layered scheme of federal fraud. You stole identities. You engaged with violent criminal syndicates. You attempted to destroy the lives of the very people who welcomed you into their family. You are not sorry for your crimes. You are only sorry that your arrogance finally caught up with you and that you were outsmarted by the very man you tried to destroy." The courtroom held its collective breath. I felt my heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm of absolute, undisputed victory. "It is the judgment of this court," the judge declared, reading directly from the official sentencing document, "that you, Chloe Rollins, are hereby sentenced to serve 60 months in a federal correctional institution without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full financial restitution to all defrauded parties, including the Small Business Administration and Rollins Holdings." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down onto the sounding block. It was a sharp, loud, violently definitive crack that signaled the absolute end of Chloe's life as she knew it. Chloe's knees buckled. She collapsed into her chair, letting out a gut-wrenching wail of pure, unadulterated despair. It was the sound of a woman realizing that her youth, her freedom, and her future had just been erased by her own greed. Two armed federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing her firmly by the arms to escort her back to the holding cells. She dragged her feet, sobbing uncontrollably, looking over her shoulder at me one last time, waiting for me to react. People like Chloe expect you to scream. They expect you to rub your victory in their faces. They thrive on the drama, the attention, and the emotional, explosive conflict. But I had spent 40 years building an empire in the shadows. I knew that the most absolute, devastating revenge you can ever inflict upon a greedy narcissist is complete and total indifference. I did not gloat. I did not shout a victorious insult. I did not even make eye contact with her as the marshals dragged her away. I stood up slowly from the wooden gallery bench. I picked up my classic felt fedora in my right hand. I placed it onto my head, using both hands to adjust the brim with slow, meticulous precision. I casually buttoned the center button of my tailored suit jacket, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle on my lapel. I let a very faint, almost microscopic smile touch the corner of my lips. It was a smile meant only for myself, the ultimate quiet realization that the empire I built had successfully defended the man I am. Without looking back, I turned on the heel of my polished leather Oxford shoe and began walking up the center aisle. My footsteps echoed steadily against the hardwood floor. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the bright, echoing hallway. I walked away without saying a single word. I proved to her that she was absolutely nothing to me. She was not a rival. She was not a threat. She was just a piece of trash that I had finally swept off my sidewalk. The heavy mechanized hum of my custom garage doors opening is a sound I have come to appreciate very much. The doors roll up smoothly, revealing a massive climate-controlled space paved with polished gray epoxy floors. My new estate is a breathtaking 5,000-square-foot stone and glass mansion sitting on 2 acres of pristine property in one of the most exclusive, heavily guarded suburbs outside of Chicago. It is the kind of house billionaires buy when they want absolute peace and absolute security. I have enough garage space to park 6 luxury vehicles. I could fill this room with imported Italian sports cars or custom-built vintage classics. But sitting right dead in the center of this immaculate, brightly lit space is not a Ferrari or a Rolls-Royce. It is my rusted, broken-down 1998 camper RV. It took Julian a week to track it down. After Chloe called the city to have it illegally towed that freezing night, it sat rotting in a municipal impound lot on the south side. I paid the exorbitant fines and hired a private flatbed truck to carefully transport it to my new estate. I did not wash it. I did not fix the cracked weather stripping or paint over the massive patches of brown rust eating away at the side panels. I keep it exactly the way it was on the night they threw me out. I do not live in it, of course. My new house has 6 bedrooms, heated floors, and a private chef who comes in 3 days a week. But I walk out into the garage every single morning with my cup of black coffee, and I stare at that ugly, broken-down machine. It is my personal monument. It is a daily reminder of exactly what happens when you mistake family ties for absolute loyalty. It reminds me of the freezing wind, the feeling of total betrayal, and the exact moment I decided to stop playing the victim and become the architect of my own justice. That rusted RV grounds me. It ensures that I will never ever allow anyone to underestimate me or take advantage of my kindness again. But looking at that RV also made me realize something deeply unsettling. I survived that night because I had $45 million hidden behind a corporate trust. I survived because I had the financial firepower to hire Julian and completely obliterate the people trying to destroy me. But what about the people who do not have a secret empire? What about the thousands of elderly men and women in this city who are actually in the exact position Chloe and Beatrice thought I was in? What happens to the grandfathers whose children forged their signatures to steal their retirement funds? What happens to the grandmothers whose greedy daughters-in-law successfully manipulate corrupt doctors into signing fraudulent conservatorship papers? They get locked away in places like the Oakwood State Care Facility to rot in silence while their ungrateful families spend their life savings. I refused to let my victory end with just my own family. I sat down with Julian in his downtown office and I authorized the immediate transfer of $5 million from the Rollins Holdings Corporate Trust to establish a brand new legal entity. We called it the Rollins Foundation for Elder Justice. It is a fully funded nonprofit legal aid defense group. I did not hire cheap entry-level lawyers looking for experience. I hired the sharks. I hired ruthless, brilliant corporate litigators and aggressive private investigators. We set up a hotline specifically for senior citizens facing financial abuse, housing theft, or fraudulent medical commitments orchestrated by their own families. When a frightened 70-year-old woman calls our office saying her son is trying to illegally evict her from her own home, my lawyers do not send a polite warning letter. They descend on that son like a legal avalanche entirely free of charge to the victim. We freeze their assets, we drag them into federal court, and we make sure they face the absolute maximum criminal penalties for elder abuse. We have saved over 60 homes in the last 8 months alone. I took the pain my family tried to inflict on me and forged it into a shield for the most vulnerable people in the city. And speaking of my former family, the universe has a very precise way of balancing its scales. Beatrice thought she was untouchable. She thought she was a high society matriarch who deserved to sip expensive wine and look down on the working class. When Rollins Holdings legally seized her house and evicted her, and when her stolen bank accounts were seized to pay for her federal legal fines, she was left with absolutely nothing. Her country club friends abandoned her immediately. Nobody wants to be associated with a woman implicated in a federal financial fraud ring. Today, the woman who complained about the grease stains on my work boots is working a minimum wage job just to survive. Beatrice is a part-time night shift janitor for a mid-level corporate office building downtown. At 68 years old, she spends her nights pushing a heavy yellow mop bucket down empty fluorescent-lit hallways, emptying trash cans for junior executives. Her expensive designer manicures are a thing of the past. Her hands are now dry, cracked, and ruined by the harsh industrial bleach she uses to scrub commercial toilets. She lives in a suffocating, damp basement apartment in a neighborhood she used to mock. The ceiling leaks when it rains, the heating barely works, and the smell of mildew is permanently soaked into the few cheap clothes she can afford. I saw her once a few months ago. I was leaving a late dinner with Julian near the financial district. I saw her through the ground floor window of an office building. She was wearing a baggy blue uniform, slowly wiping down a glass conference table with a dirty rag. She looked exhausted, broken, and completely hollow. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment watching her. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the urge to go inside and help her. I just turned up the collar of my tailored wool coat and walked away to my waiting car. She earned her life, and I earned mine. As for Malik, his fate was perhaps the most tragic, yet entirely of his own making. When the FBI dragged his wife out of their luxury townhouse in handcuffs, Malik was left standing on the porch with a single garbage bag of clothes. He lost his home, his marriage, and his dignity in the span of 10 minutes. He knew he could not come to me. He knew I had permanently closed the door on him the day he pawned my mother's gold locket. Malik could not face the humiliation. He could not look the people of Chicago in the eye, knowing he had stood by while his wife plotted to destroy his own father. A few weeks after Chloe was sentenced to federal prison, Malik simply vanished. He did not leave a forwarding address. He did not reach out to his mother in her basement apartment. My private investigators tracked his last known movements to a cheap bus terminal on the outskirts of the city. He bought a one-way cash ticket heading out west. Rumor has it he is working anonymous cash in hand, day labor jobs in the desert, drifting from town to town like a ghost. I have never tried to find him. A father's job is to raise a boy to be a strong, independent man. I gave him the tools, the education, and the love to succeed. But he chose to be a coward. He chose to let greed and a toxic woman dictate his morality. You cannot save a drowning man who actively refuses to swim. You can only let him go and protect your own peace. My city is quiet now. The toxic noise of their entitlement and their endless demands is completely gone from my life. I wake up in my massive estate. I walk into my pristine garage. I look at that rusted RV, and I breathe the sweet, unburdened air of a man who is finally truly free. The wind off Lake Michigan feels entirely different when you are standing 80 stories above the city. It does not bite your skin or freeze your bones the way it does when you are shivering in a broken-down RV in a desolate parking lot. Up here on the penthouse balcony of the flagship tower of Rollins Holdings, the wind just feels like absolute and total freedom. I lean against the thick, tempered glass railing, looking out over the sprawling, glittering grid of Chicago. The headlights of thousands of cars trace red and white lines through the concrete canyons far below. I built a sizable piece of this skyline. I poured the foundation of my life with calloused hands and quiet patience, working until my back ached and my fingers bled. I raise a heavy crystal tumbler to my lips and take a slow, deliberate sip of a 25-year-old single-barrel bourbon. The amber liquid burns a warm, comforting path down my chest. I stand in the quiet luxury of my penthouse surrounded by silence, and I think about the man I was just a year ago. A man who wore faded flannel shirts and scuffed steel toe boots, hiding a massive empire because he desperately wanted to believe that the people sitting at his dinner table loved him for his heart and not his bank account. I was a fool for a very long time, but I'm not a fool anymore. Beatrice, Chloe, and Malik taught me a brutal but entirely necessary lesson. They showed me that blood does not automatically grant you loyalty, and a marriage certificate does not guarantee a genuine partnership. Sometimes the people you bleed for will gladly watch you bleed out if it means they can pawn your watch and fund their own selfish desires. But I do not carry anger in my heart anymore. Anger is a heavy, toxic anchor, and I have finally cut the rope. Beatrice is scrubbing floors in the middle of the night. Chloe is trading her designer dresses for an orange jumpsuit. Malik is wandering the desert looking for a life he threw away. They are living the exact lives they earned through their own blinding greed and arrogance. I do not wish them harm, but I will never wish them well. They simply do not exist in my world anymore. Instead, I think about the Rollins Foundation for Elder Justice. Every single week, I sit at my mahogany desk and read reports of grandmothers keeping their homes and grandfathers recovering their stolen pensions because my legal team stepped in when nobody else would. I took the darkest, most agonizing betrayal of my life and turned it into a titanium shield for the defenseless. That is the true power of wealth. It is not the fleet of luxury cars parked in my garage or the custom Italian suits in my closet. It is the ability to protect the vulnerable, to enforce justice, and to hold predators accountable in a world that often turns a blind eye to the suffering of the elderly. I take one last sip of my bourbon and look out at the city I conquered. I am 72 years old. I am free. I am wealthy beyond measure. And most importantly, I am completely unburdened by the weight of toxic people. I turn my back to the glittering city lights and walk inside the warm, quiet sanctuary of my penthouse. The silence in this massive space is not lonely. It is profound. It is the sound of a man who has finally reclaimed his own life, a man who knows exactly who he is and exactly what he is worth. If there is anything you take away from my story, let it be this. True wealth is never defined by the clothes you wear or the car you drive. It is measured by the clarity of your character and the boundaries you courageously defend. We often bleed ourselves dry to build fortresses for people who only see us as disposable bricks. When family trades loyalty for greed, stepping away is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-preservation. Let the ungrateful inherit the emptiness of their own ambition. The greatest revenge is not destruction, but reclaiming your own peace, standing tall in your truth, and allowing karma to balance the ultimate ledger. Did you like my story? Let me know what you think and tell me which city you are watching from in the comments below. If you believe in standing up for your own dignity and letting karma do its job, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more life stories like this one. Thank you for listening, and always remember to protect your peace.